The telegram finds you between breaths. One moment you're polishing a pair of second-hand goggles because it feels like doing something useful, and the next you're reading a sentence that folds your life like a paper map. Report to Air Transport Auxiliary. You run a thumb along the edge of the card, feel the tiny burr where the cut wasn't perfect, and decide that imperfect edges are fine for people who will soon point at a horizon and say, gently, "Yes, that way." You aren't joining a combat squadron. You are volunteering to make busy the sky between factory and frontline, to lift brand new machines from their nests and deliver them, intact and temperate, to the people who will ask sterner things of them. It sounds almost simple. It is not simple. It is, however, necessary in a way your bones immediately understand. You pack accordingly: logbook, pencil, a sandwich wrapped like a promise, and the belief that a person can learn anything if the lesson arrives as a checklist. The railway carriage smells of damp wool and optimism. Outside, hedgerows tick past like polite metronomes. Inside, a steward pours tea that thinks very highly of itself. In your lap the telegram grows heavier the closer you get to the tiny station named in its lines. You imagine a reception committee of stern uniforms. You meet instead a smiling corporal with a clipboard and a bus that has learned to pronounce airfield. The airfield is a half-finished sentence, hangars still learning their grammar, a control caravan with windows too young to be strict, a line of aircraft wearing primer like underclothes. A woman in a sensible coat steps out of the office, hair pinned with the kind of precision that says she trusts lists. "Welcome to the ATA," she says, and just like that, you belong to a service that exists to move things along. Mainstream fact: the Air Transport Auxiliary, formed in 1939, ferries aircraft of many makes from factories and maintenance units to operational squadrons, freeing combat pilots for the front and keeping Britain's flying supply chain stubbornly alive. You repeat it to yourself: form to ferry, until the words become a runway. Recruitment feels like a chorus, not a solo. Civilians who flew for weekend sport. Instructors who taught in quiet corners of airfields and now want their pupils to use full-size verbs. Veterans who still smell a little of deserts and salt. Ab initio, trainees, Latin that means from the beginning, who will be taught to fly to a competent, careful standard and then trusted with brand new machines because wartime prefers apprentices who learn while walking. You shake hands with a man who once dusted crops in a biplane and can read wind from the color of grass, and a woman who sold hats last month and now laughs easily at the thought of a pre-flight walk-round. Everyone has the same look, an ordinary face lit from inside by a timetable. Medical? Yes, but humane. Eyes that can find a railway junction from 2,000 feet. Ears that hear a misfire, lungs that like cold mornings. Quirky tidbit: the ATA accepts skilled pilots whom combat units would turn away, those who are one-eyed, one-armed, or colorblind, on the sensible grounds that ferrying demands precision, not perfect symmetry, and that a map's truth does not fade if seen with one eye. You watch a veteran with a neat leather sleeve button the cuff of his flying jacket with calm competence, and feel the room tilt in the direction of respect. There is a lecture, of course. A cheerful officer with chalk draws a triangle of speed, time, and distance, and then fills the board with names that sound like cousins: Magister, Oxford, Harvard, Hurricane, Spitfire. "You will move between types as dispatch requires," she says, "and your friend will be a little paper book called the Ferry Pilot's Notes. Treat it like an elder sibling with a sharp pencil. You nod as if you already love this book. You will love this book. It will tell you which lever is not a lever, which knob is shy, which undercarriage prefers gentleness to flattery. It will keep you from attempting to retract the wheels on an aeroplane that has no wheels to retract, which, you are told, is a common social embarrassment. Uniform? Not quite. The ATA dresses you for competence, not ceremony. Blue-gray or brown slacks or skirt, a warm sweater, a flying jacket that looks better with petrol stains than without, a wings badge that says, "I move things." There are no guns in the aircraft you'll ferry, no radios in many of them either. You learn to like silence as a partner. The instructors teach you the manners of paper, plot your leg on the ordnance survey, draw your wind arrow, compute drift with a thumb on a protractor and a stopwatch that believes in minutes more than you do. Dead reckoning, someone says, and you think that's a terrible name for a very lively art. Light joke number 1. You decide to rename it. Mostly a live reckoning in your logbook margin and promise not to mention it during inspections. The day ends with hands on metal. A mild-mannered magister stands patient on the grass like a bicycle with ambitions. You trace its edges the way a reader follows a sentence. Fuel, oil, controls free, pins pulled, covers off, tires persuaded to be round. You climb in, careful with your elbows, respectful with your feet, and the cockpit smells like canvas and arithmetic. An instructor leans in and points to instruments that are more personality than precision. You memorize where, honest, lives on each dial. Fly the map, he says, and if the map sulks, fly the clock. When both sulk, trust the ground to still be down. Light joke number 2. You ask if the sun can be bribed with biscuits to reappear on command. He says try chocolate. The sun has standards. Your first circuit tastes like cold tea and courage. The little trainer lifts as if agreeing to a polite request. The airfield shrinks to a postage stamp with a runway scribble, and the world organizes itself into useful nouns: river, road, spire, smoke. You match the nouns to your paper nouns, count seconds on the watch, and draw a tiny mental arrow each time the wind makes a suggestion. Look out, the instructor reminds you, the most important verb. You look out and see a country stitching itself, factories with open mouths where new aircraft roll their shiny eyes, maintenance units with neat rows of machines having their patience adjusted, squadrons waiting with pencils for serial numbers. You will be the sentence between those nouns. Evenings are for learning the grammar of the organization. Ferry pools, each a hub that catches assignments and releases pilots like starlings in tidy bursts. Dispatch, a choir of voices and triplicate forms. A telephone that rings with the exact rhythm of destiny. You copy your name into a rota and immediately become a person who sleeps near a bag, a pencil, and 3 sandwiches. Historians still argue whether the ATA's early recruitment genius owed more to far-sighted administration or to wartime desperation cleverly tidied into policy. You think it was both, bureaucracy with boots on, and luck that decided to act like planning. You write your first page of the new logbook in tidy capitals, because the page deserves to meet the best version of your handwriting. You add a line for weather, cooperative, for wind, opinionated, for self, cautiously delighted. You fold your paper map along a crease that will, with use, become a valley you can find by touch alone. You pin your wings to your sweater and feel, absurdly but accurately, a little taller. Light joke number 3. You promise the badge it will see more sandwiches than medals, and it seems content with that bargain. Night comes with its own paperwork. Forms that practice being important. Signatures that practice being legible. A bunk that remembers the shape of people who have chosen usefulness over drama. You lie there and rehearse the triangle of speed, time, distance until the sides put themselves to bed. Somewhere an engine clears its throat. Somewhere a factory acceptance certificate dries on a clipboard. Tomorrow you may take a trainer to a maintenance unit, or a hurricane to a squadron where the ground crew will already know her serial number better than you know your own birthday. You feel that knowledge arrive like a slow, friendly tide. You will not be the story the newspapers write. You will be one of the reasons there is still a story to write at all. Before sleep, you lay the telegram on the bedside table, face down so the words can rest. Your fingers smell faintly of dope and oil. Your mind smells of pencil shavings and weather. In the morning, after tea that has ambitions and toast that meets them halfway, you will sign out your first solo delivery and point a little arrow at a corner of the map. The sky will make its opinions known. You will translate them into drift corrections and cheerful stubbornness. And at the end of that line there will be a set of hands waiting to take the aircraft and say, with relief that sounds like a thank you, "We needed this." You will nod, because the triangle of your day, dispatch, flight, handover, fits, and because being necessary is the nicest way to be tired. Morning arrives with the sound of carbon paper exhaling. You step into the ferry pool office and feel the airfield's brain at work, telephones chiming like small harps, typewriter keys drumming out itineraries, a wall map shining with an embroidery of pins and colored threads. Nothing here is heroic at first glance. Everything here is essential. You sign the book on the counter, ink smelling like resolve, and the dispatcher lifts her head with the particular smile of someone who knows 50 aircraft by serial number and all of their moods by rumor. "Good, another pair of hands," she says, and hands you a flimsy. It's the shape of your day, factory to maintenance unit, then a hop to squadron, returning via rail with a sandwich and the memory of a runway. A second slip rides in the same clip, weather, not prophecy but opinionated. Isobars sketched by a pencil that has seen things. You stand beneath the map and match threads to the faint creases of your paper charts until the route in your head looks like a tidy sentence. This is how a ferry pool breathes. The requisitions arrive. New Spitfire from the factory, Hurricane out of repair, and Oxford that wants a new home. The dispatcher is both librarian and conductor, shuffling cards in a drawer labeled with today's needs. She knows who has the right class, those ATA categories that say which types you may fly, who has hours on twins, who slept, who hasn't looked an Argus in the eye this week. Mainstream fact, the ATA worked from regional ferry pools, White Waltham serving as headquarters, without stations like Hamble, Hatfield, Ringway, and Prestwick coordinating assignments so pilots could move solo, aircraft by aircraft, to wherever the operational timetable pointed. You add those names to your inner atlas and feel the country get smaller in a helpful way. Your name finds its card, your card finds its clip, and the clip finds the dispatch hook. This is bureaucracy's kindness, a visible cue that becomes a visible day. You collect your ferry pilot's notes from the pigeonhole, flip to the types you may see, and let the margins remind you of gentle truths. Hurricane, carb heat early. Beware the nose that likes to be impatient. Oxford, watch the asymmetric smile if one engine is overconfident. A Magister Doodle, your own art, grins where the book lists cockpit latches, which is either excellent memory technique or graffiti. Around you the pool is a small city. A corporal oils the date stamp and tests it on the blotter. Today, 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 like a conjurer making sure the trick is still legal. A runner pins new pins into the map with a solemnity usually reserved for christenings. The tea trolley rolls in with steam and criticism. The kettle insists the forecast is wrong and that any sensible person would wait an hour and a biscuit. Quirky tidbit. The dispatch desk keeps a saucer of string cut to exact miles so the clerks can loop distances quickly over the map. No protractor, just snug twine and a trained eye. Your favorite length is labeled fag and hop, which is not official but is extremely descriptive. You step out to the veranda and the field answers with realism. The windstock practices semaphore 4. Steady-ish. Cloud bases pretend they remember how to be ceilings. And the grass runway rehearses firmness by letting a bicycle cross without swallowing it whole. Someone chalks the day's telephone codes on a board. Someone else underlines, no formation, even though nobody here would dream of doing it. Ferry flying is solo, always. You are not a parade. You are a courier. The only voices in the cockpit will be your own and the aircraft's, and about half the fleet won't answer even if you ask nicely. Dispatch, when the time comes, is a swift domestic scene. The dispatcher slides a folder across the counter. Delivery chit. Factory acceptance, Form 700 with its neat list of serviceable systems, fuel ticket, your route, and a small moral. Do not be clever with weather. You sign where signatures behave. She taps the fuel line on the map. Keep a spare half hour, she says, because the railway gods are sleepy today. Light joke 1. You offer to bribe those gods with the biscuits in your kit. Keep the biscuits, she replies. They answer to no one. Training keeps ambushing you in useful ways. Before each assignment you read aloud, quietly, the first page of the type you'll fly. The pool instructors taught you a habit. Trace the engine controls with 2 fingers before you turn anything. Say the undercarriage truth out loud, up, down, fixed, and promise the flap lever you won't mistake it for something romantic. You walk out to today's aircraft with your hands already half done with their checks, and by the time you circle the nose you know which panel screw is missing and which tire would like a quiet word with air. Back in the office, telephones practice their duets. One line is a factory announcing a machine with a serial number that sounds like mathematics. Another is a squadron adjutant trying to turn tomorrow into this afternoon by pure will. The dispatcher juggles both and still makes your second cup of tea. Historians still argue whether the ATA's legendary efficiency came from inspired centralization at White Waltham or from the dispatch clerk's ability to run empires with teapots and carbon sets. You decide the answer is both, plus shoes that don't mind stairs. On the wall, a white board of names travels through columns like a school timetable, available briefing out on job rail return. You watch your own name migrate to briefing and feel the small, private ceremony of being officially busy. The briefing itself is a humane ritual. Wind, weather, diversions that will take you to relief fields with grass that has learned to be helpful. The meteorology corporal sketches a front like a sleeping dog and says kindly, "Don't wake it." Light joke 2. You ask if the dog likes biscuits. "Cloud eats biscuits," she says. "Bring a sandwich." By noon, the pool has become a tide chart. Pilots go out singly, return as passengers on trains, drift back to the desk to log hours and hand in forms that will be typed and filed and eventually archived by people who will sigh with happiness at a tidy signature. You add your own line to the log: serial, aerodrome, Hobbs, remarks, cloud sulky, map obedient, and the clerk stamps it into officialness with the slam of a date that has decided to exist. Factories sit at the far ends of your threads. You learn their smells: warm dope and sawdust, metal and certificates drying on clipboards. At a factory you pause at the acceptance bay and put your hand on a wing like a blessing. Somewhere, a fitter grins crookedly because he knows which hinge will squeak first. Somewhere, a civilian in overalls signs a paper that says the aircraft is allowed to leave home. The pool, back at base, times these moments with the accuracy of a choir. Too soon and you cue in the air. Too late and a squadron's afternoon goes hungry. You will not always get a Spitfire, and when you do, you will pretend not to be smug. Many days are faithful trainers and twins with habits, and those days are the backbone of this office's confidence. The dispatch board marks each with a tiny symbol so that, later, an accident board can read the day backward if it must. "We keep paperwork the way sailors keep rope," the dispatcher once said. "Not because we love knots, but because we love getting home." Light joke 3. You suggest a new form. Proof of biscuit consumption during operational waits, and she grants provisional approval pending sugar rationing. A siren somewhere practices being irrelevant, and then decides to stop. The office does not flinch. The map gleams a little in late light, threads bright against the paper's pale sea. You watch another pilot step up for her briefing, calm, hair coiled like punctuation, and you feel how this pool turns strangers into colleagues and colleagues into a machine that moves other machines. You pocket your string mile, you fold your flimsy into your logbook, you touch your notes once more on the way to the door. Evening returns you the way a well-written sentence returns to its subject. You hand the aircraft to its new people, ground crew leaning forward, logbook accepted, snag list discussed like a pastry recipe, and someone says, "We needed this." The exact phrase that makes every mile worth its arithmetic. Back at the pool you log the day, wash your hands of graphite and coffee, and stand a moment beneath the wall map. The pins are exactly where they should be. The threads rest. The dispatcher hangs her cardigan on the back of the chair as if even sweaters know they belong in this room. You head to the billets with your sandwich wrapper and your pencil stub and the thought that tomorrow's clip will hold a different route but the same purpose. The office lights dim. The date stamp sleeps. In some future archive a clerk will open today's file and nod at the order in it, not knowing the jokes that kept the ink from going gloomy, not hearing the kettle's opinions, not smelling the oil on the door latch. But you will remember, and as you drift towards sleep you can still see the map while your eyes are closed, threads gentle as veins, a country quietly alive with errands, and a pool that makes sure each errand learns to fly. The map on your knee looks like a polite quilt, all creams and greens and patient blue threads, and you love it the way a sailor loves a harbor light, not as decoration, but as a promise that your guessing will be educated. Dispatch gives you the destination and the weather's mood. Your job is to turn both into a line you can actually fly. So you spread the 500,000 sheet across the briefing table, set a protractor on the factory like a compass rose gone visiting, and begin the ancient arithmetic of persuading air to behave like a timetable. "Trust the paper," your instructor said. "It doesn't get static." Out where many ATA aircraft have no radio at all and others carry sets that function mostly as heavy conversation pieces, the map and the clock are your co-pilots. Mainstream fact: thousands of ATA ferry flights were completed by dead reckoning with only magnetic compass, airspeed indicator, altimeter, and stopwatch. Radio bearings, QDMs, and homing beacons were luxuries, not guarantees, especially in trainer types and early single-seat fighters ferried unarmed and often unwired. So you build your triangle, true track from A to B, wind arrows scribbled from the met man's kind warning, drift penciled in with the confidence of someone who knows rubber erasers exist. The ritual feels monkish and satisfying. True heading becomes magnetic after you beg a small favor from today's local variation. Magnetic yields compass after you pay the tax called deviation. Your aircraft's personal quirk list of I point a little left when you asked me not to. You note the ground speed that will be yours if the wind honors your arithmetic. You write in the margins as if annotating a recipe. River Bend 18 minutes, Rail Junction 29 minutes, Church Spire 41 minutes, if not sulking. Light joke 1, you add. Chocolate at 30 minutes. To the knee board and inform your stomach that this is precision work. You know which features keep promises. Railways are excellent. War changes timetables, not track beds. Rivers are philosophical but legible. Roads can be faithful if the blackout hasn't turned their edges into soft rumors. Towns can be treacherous silhouettes when every pane of glass has volunteered to be a starless night. You pencil an altitude that respects both weather and chimneys, then underline 2 relief landing grounds along the way. If fog grows opinions, try here, because optimism is not a plan. You fold the map along the leg, the crease already slicked with finger oil into something your hands recognize without looking. Quirky tidbit: veteran ferry hands show you how to draw your course line with a candle-waxed pencil so drizzle beads and slides off the graphite like manners off a cat. They also swear by a strip of elastic, origin undiscussed but suspiciously stocking-like. To keep the knee board from escaping at the first hint of aerobatics you will not be performing. You add both to your kit and pretend you invented them. The stopwatch gets wound with the solemnity of a church bell. The protractor goes back into the pocket where it lives, corners dulled from 100 little victories. Then you go fly the drawing. The factory obliges with a runway that points more or less where you need to begin pretending you always meant to go. You line up, run a finger along the throttle to remind it you believe in smoothness, and the aircraft lifts with that useful indignation all new machines have. Fine, I'll show you what I can do. Climb power, engine set, mixture where the notes say it won't sulk. Heading settled on the compass, left hand on throttle, right hand on the little world. The stopwatch declares, with operatic seriousness, that the leg has begun. Dead reckoning in practice is an hour of polite arguments. The wind makes a suggestion. You correct 2 degrees. A cloud forgets how to be transparent. You slip 100 feet and left 2 hairs still on your line because your pencil line owns you now, and you are content with the arrangement. Look out, keep speeding time. Eyes outside, instruments quick, map a glance, then back to the sky where the real story writes itself. A farmhouse roof flashes pewter where your margin notes expected brick. You check the river instead and approve its handwriting. Light joke 2, you scold the sun for flirting with cloud during working hours, and promise to file a report if it continues. When the first fix arrives, railway crossing with a silo like a bishop on a chessboard, you press the stopwatch and say, "There you are." as if you found a friend at a busy station. The minutes match within a whisker of the plan. You are not surprised. You allow yourself to be pleased anyway. You mark a tiny dot on the map with the sharp end of the pencil and write a smug little, "No one else will ever see." Then, because the world respects humility, the next 10 minutes come with a crosswind that behaves like a cat who just learned it can knock pens off tables. You shift the heading a degree right and count 1 elephant, 2 elephant, to make sure your patience keeps up with your corrections. Historians still argue whether the ATA's no radio, map and clock culture produced better fundamental airmanship than its wireless contemporaries or simply exposed pilots to avoidable weather traps. You tidy the debate into a practical conclusion. Radio behaves until it doesn't. Paper is honest about its limits. And both are improved by people who practice not being surprised. You keep your altimeter set politely to QNH when the ground matters and QFE when the runway is the only religion. Most days you belong to both churches at once, and no one minds. Cloud has favorite tricks. See mist creeps inland to rearrange everyone's plans. Hill fog likes to hide whole counties with the confident aplomb of a magician with an accomplice. You learn not to bargain. Instead, you turn 30 degrees off track and carry on in clear air until the weather tires of its own joke, then re-intercept the line like a person who pretends they meant to admire that particular field all along. Your map forgives you. The clock agrees to reset its expectations. If the sky actually refuses your appointment, your relief ground beckons, and the etiquette of unscheduled arrivals, land into wind, park where engines and geese are unlikely to feud, carry your map to the farmer like an apology note, earns you a local legend status and sometimes a sandwich. Landmarks under blackout become a syllabus in silhouette. A cathedral stops being a lacework of stone and becomes a geometry problem with a spire solution. A town's edge is a darker dark. A viaduct is a rumor of parallel lines over ink. You measure these shapes against the shape language you've been teaching your eyes and discover the map has written its phrases into your bones. The second fix lands nearly on time. The third, a minute late because the wind remembered it was hired to work. You note the minute, adjust your ground speed, and give the stopwatch a frown it ignores with dignity. There are aids of a sort. A few routes hide beacons like shy lighthouses. A controller at a big field may answer your polite request for a bearing with a number that feels like a friend's hand on your shoulder. But many days it is you, an indifferent sky, and a paper rectangle with more authority than voice. So you rehearse tiny redundancies. You underline the diversion fields in a second color you pencil. On Mayan, fuel home, where your eyes will trip over it. You tape a short list of engine settings to the panel so a sudden noise won't erase your brain. Light joke 3. You consider taping. Breathe. Next to the mixture control. Decide that's redundant. And breathe anyway. On good days the destination arrives exactly where the map said it would be. And you join the circuit with the satisfaction of a sentence that lands on its own period. On other days the runway plays hide and seek. You circle once at a sensible height, let the windsock spell its opinion, and commit to the shape the field offers. Either way, the taxiing feels like a paragraph break. You shut down, the propeller's last sigh a satisfied consonant, and note your times with the same care you used for your headings. The ground crew takes the machine with grateful hands. Your logbook takes your numbers with the same .I in the clubhouse later. With tea that has decided to be enough, you unfold the map and trace the leg you flew. The crease is deeper, the wax line a little thinner from rain and thumb. You pencil a small correction where a railway bridge turned out to be newer than your sheet, and you copy the correction to the margins of your memory. The clock goes back into your pocket with its self-respect intact. The protractor winks like geometry that has become a habit. You think, there are 100 ways to be lost and at least as many to be found. A good map and a polite clock simply help you prefer the second. Your new favorite book fits a pocket but thinks like a library. The ferry pilot's notes arrive stitched in drab covers, thin enough to slide under a map, dense enough to stop bad habits at the door. You crack one open and meet a civility of checklists, neat, short, bossy in the kind way, each page a handshake with a different personality. Tiger moth, no flaps, no brakes, tail skid, Spitfire, pneumatic wheel brakes via lever on stick, differential by rudder bar. Hurricane, watch radiator shutters. Oxford, don't be clever on one engine. Anson, fuel cocks. Left/right, check crossfeed. The book doesn't care how romantic you feel about airplanes. It cares that you say the right words in the right order before you move any levers that can turn an afternoon into a committee meeting. You make a ritual of it. Before each job, you find the page, touch each line with a finger, and murmur the liturgy. Fuel, on and sufficient. Mags, both. Mixture, rich unless otherwise instructed. Pitch, fine. Radiators, set. Undercarriage, confirm the truth, fixed, down, intention to move. Flaps, type and purpose. Mainstream fact, in many British fighters of the era, the flaps were for landing only, simple, large-angled devices. Notes explicitly warned. Do not use flaps for take OFF. A sentence that has saved more fences than anyone admits. You write that one on your kneeboard in capital letters the first week, just in case your optimism ever tries to masquerade as aerodynamics. The tiger moth page is charming and brutal all at once. Chocks, please, it implies, since brakes belong to richer futures. Mind the swing, since tailriggers know you better than you know yourself. And remember, no flaps, because the air is going to be honest about whether you've earned it. You climb into the tiger and can hear the page turn in your head. Priming strokes counted like beads, throttle set to not much. Props swung by a sensible grown-up, and then that lovely cough to life. The notes say, airspeed alive by here, lift tail by there. And when you do, the whole contraption consents, benevolent as a milk cart with wings. The Spitfire page is clipped and aristocratic. Check boost cut out, mixture to auto rich, radiator flap as required, undercarriage, select up after positive climb, confirm both greens out. And then the line you memorize like a poem. Pneumatic brakes, operate with lever on control column, use rudder to apply differentially. Which is to say, squeeze with 2 fingers, dance with your feet, and pretend you studied this exact ballet for years. Light joke 1. The first time you taxi a Spitfire you vow to send a thank you note to whoever invented ankles. Your ankles, smug, accept applause but demand better socks. The Hurricane page feels stout and kindly but insists on its own etiquettes. Coolant temperature before you ask for anything heroic, oil where it should be, boost where it's welcome. It tells you the speeds that are not lies, best climb, best glide, approach like this, threshold like that, and you underline them with the affection one reserves for road signs on narrow lanes. The Oxford page, twin-engined and teacherly, begins with a small sermon on symmetry. If one engine sulks, the other will attempt to fly you into a newspaper. Resist. It gives you numbers for feathering and reminds you how to rehearse the muscle memory for dead foot, dead engine, without actually killing anything. You practice on the grass in your mind until your feet believe they are sensible. The beauty of the notes is their laziness on your behalf. They do not waste syllables. Undercarriage, lock tailwheel where fitted. Prop, do not cycle below oil temperature. Mixture, lean at cruise except where the book shouts not to. They have a particular kindness for traps. Warning, fuel selector detents ambiguous. Confirmed by sight and pressure. That line, or its cousin, lives in more types than you'd like. You trace the fuel path in each new cockpit like a pilgrim fingers a saint's relic. Later, when the engine clears its throat and continues instead of quitting, you will know why page 3 was so sure of itself. Quirky tidbit, the notes margins grow folklore. Someone's pencil adds, left mag lies, beside a misbehaving switch. Someone else draws a tiny umbrella near. Open canopy before landing in crosswind. A private joke about weather and paperwork. On the Harvard page, a bored genius sketches a tiny map of the throttle quadrant with, "Don't pull this in a hurry," by the mixture. No one admits authorship. Everyone benefits. And the books feel a few degrees warmer for having accepted graffiti that knows its place. You keep your own private appendix on a card tucked under the elastic of your kneeboard. A half-dozen one-liners per type you've met this month. Magister, airspeed optimistic, land with patience. Anson, remember the trailing edge flaps are honest but hungry for drag. Keep some power. Oxford, trim is your friend, especially with students you cannot see because there are none. Spitfire, nose long, don't hide the runway. We'll land if the book and wind consent. Hurricane, likes a three-pointer, don't float. She'll forgive but she also keeps score. The card smells like pencil and fear turned into manners. You learn to recognize families of controls. British levers love to look alike when they shouldn't. Someone somewhere decided that black knobs were fashionable, so you train your fingers by shape and location, not color. The notes help. Undercarriage selector, port side gate type, flaps, starboard pull and hold, air brakes, none. You repeat. Undercarriage is not flap, flap is not undercarriage, until your brain begins labeling in its sleep. Light joke 2, you threaten to paint the undercarriage lever with jam so you'll never confuse it. Maintenance frowns. You eat the jam and settle for discipline. They also save you from loving instruments too much. ASIs lie when excited, an instructor says, and the notes nod, approach by attitude, confirm with speed, but attitude first. Oil temperature lives in minutes, not seconds, another page implies. Be patient with warm-ups, impatient with pressure that wanders. The notes list V&E in a tone that leaves no room for imagination. You underline the line and agree not to teach physics any new tricks today. Historians still argue whether the ATA's condensed type notes, designed to make hitch-free hopping between dozens of aircraft, improved safety by standardizing mines or eroded it by making mastery feel portable. Reading in your bunk by a dim bulb, you land on the compromise. The notes are a bridge. You still must walk across with your eyes open. You make a game of staging cockpit rehearsals on chairs. Left hand to throttle, right to stick that isn't there. Feet pressing phantom rudder bars while your mouth whispers. Boost, prop, mixture, undercarriage, flaps, screens, harness, hood. You mime the sequence for each type until you can do the whole dance during a kettle boil. On busy mornings you see half the billet doing the same charade, a little chorus line of wrists and ankles and wool socks, And no one mocks anyone else because everyone remembers the stomach drop the first time the greens didn't light when the lever moved. They did, of course, after you checked the selector that had quietly decided to be in neutral, a word that should be retired from aviation or at least made to wear a bell. When you get to the field, the notes ride on your kneeboard and the airplane stops being a rumor. You strap in with a harness that has a personality. Some are needy, some diplomatic, and touch the placard speeds with your fingertip as if waking a cat. Rotate by here, climb by that, circuit at such. A new cockpit offers to hide one important thing in an unhelpful place. The notes point at it in advance. Primer, under lip left, or fuel, shut off disguised as friend. The books are so often right it's unnerving. Light joke 3. You consider asking one to pick this week's horses. It declines on ethical grounds. You do not worship the notes. You consult them, argue pleasantly when weather disagrees, and thank them in the log when they rescue you from inventive mistakes. Their tone becomes your tone, brisk, encouraging, unwilling to let pride pick the altitude. After landing, you annotate the margin if you've earned the right. Approach in wind with a whisper more throttle, saves the flair from melodrama. Or, watch for gypsy crosswind near hangars. Trees invent opinions. The little book fattens on your crumbs of experience until it reads partly like you, which is either progress or a kind of friendship. In the evening, you find yourself turning pages for comfort, reading the Spitfire again as if savoring a good paragraph, smiling at the Tiger's cheerful poverty of equipment, admiring the Oxford's stern clarity. You imagine some anonymous hand in white Waltham writing the first version of each line, testing it against reality, and shaving off adjectives until only verbs remain. Check. Select. Confirm. Land. There's a kind of poetry in that, the kind that keeps people alive. You slip the notes back into the pocket by your ribs where useful things lie. Pencil, string mile, a chocolate square you are pretending to have forgotten, and the book warms to your body heat like a domesticated idea. Tomorrow, dispatch will hand you an aeroplane you've flown once and an aeroplane you've never flown at all. The notes will be the difference between new and mystery. You turn out the lamp and rehearse one last line in the dark. Undercarriage down and locked. A simple sentence, a complete thought, and let's be honest, the way you prefer your bedtime stories to end. Weather begins as a rumor in the corridor and ends as handwriting on your kneeboard. You stand at the briefing table where the map is already practicing its isobars, neat blue ropes tugging at Britain from all directions, and the meteorology corporal pours you a cup of tea that doubles as a barometer. If it scalds your lip too fast, the air is dry. If it sulks, there's damp on the way. The official version follows, fronts drawn with the confidence of a schoolmaster, wind arrows marching like obedient geese, and a penciled note that reads, in the met man's careful script, "Cloud base is variable. Do not bargain." You nod as if you were not about to bargain at least twice between here and the coast. The lecture is brief and kind. A warm front will arrive like a guest who brought luggage. A cold front will tidy the sky by shouting. An occlusion is the awkward cousin who does both and then sits on the sofa. Mainstream fact. By the early 1940s, British forecasters used the Norwegian cyclone model, Bjerknes and friends, to brief fronts and cyclogenesis on synoptic charts. RAF and Met Office staff pushed paper maps and tephograms across tables while pilots memorized where not to promise punctuality. You copied the fronts as if they were detours you would be proud to take. Then comes the arithmetic of go or no go. The ATA has minima that are less suggestions than manners. Cloud base high enough to keep chimneys honest. Visibility long enough to allow your map to work without miracles. Crosswind that doesn't try to teach you trigonometry while you're landing. You pencil your line and plant escape fields like stepping stones. If fog invents itself here, hop there. If wind sulks, wait and practice patience by eating a sandwich very slowly. The dispatcher eyes the clock and the isobars at the same time. You pretend to do either, because confidence flies straighter when it doesn't check its watch. The sky, when you step outside, offers its improvements. Mare's tails sketch the upper winds. Mackerel scales pattern a promise that weather is buying tickets. Smoke from the mess chimney lies down and points at your destination like a quiet omen. You watch the windsock argue with itself, then split the difference on your kneeboard. Quirky tidbit. Some old hands keep a scrap of spider silk pinned inside a matchbox. The per man's hygrometer. If it slackens, damp is walking up the lane. If it tightens, your map will be less sticky than your palms. You don't swear by it, but you do glance and then pretend you didn't. You walk to the aircraft reciting the sky as you go. Cumulus with cauliflower tops. Thermals tossing small aircraft like loose change. Stratus like dirty window glass. Expect drizzle and decisions. A hard-edged cloud line. Front with opinions. The cockpit accepts you with that same patient disinterest. Run up. Temperatures and pressures the way the book likes them. You set climb power, wind the stopwatch, and with a last look at the windsock's grammar, you commit to a day that will be partly about cloud and partly about not lying to yourself. Dead reckoning in cloud margins is an art of hedges. You stay on the safe side of the bad idea. Beneath base when the scud is high. Above shower tops when the horizon is clean and your diversion fields are waiting with open sleeves. When a rain curtain hangs like an unhelpful stage prop, you slide 10 degrees right, count to 60, and slide back, leaving the weather to argue with itself while you normalize your pulse. Light joke 1. You inform the cloud that your schedule is printed in ink and therefore more official. The cloud, unimpressed, points out it is printed in water and therefore everywhere. Some days the kettle forecast beats the station report. You leave under 5,000 feet and improving, and meet 2,000 and whimsical. Smoke now climbs straight up in columns, unstable air, bumps like the pockets of a baker's apron. You ease the throttle, treat your climb like a conversation, and bargain only with altitudes that don't mind being negotiated. A glider's ghost crosses your mind. Read the air, don't force it. You skin for sun on water, shadow on fields, bright edges on cloud that betray a break ahead, signposts that don't care about telephones. The Met Office tries to phone your leg through your skull anyway. Wind veers with height, so your correction changes. Temperature drops, so your mixture earns a little love. Pressure slides a fraction, so your altimeter and your humility stay in step. You keep the escape fields ticked on your kneeboard like lifesavers on a string. If fog starts knitting under you, those silent white sweaters creeping over hedges, you pick the nearest strip of grass that will behave, you call your conscience names, and you live to file the next delightful form. Station briefings teach a second, plainer grammar. If the wind is on the chimney, the valley fog will slink in by tea. If the gulls are inland, the sea is practicing opera. You do not put that on official forms, but you do put it in your bones. The ground crew adopts you into the order of practical omens. If the oil tins sweat, take your scarf. If the door hinge complains a half note lower, bring patience. If the cat sleeps belly up, the crosswind will do something unprintable. Light joke 2. You ask if the cat can be booked for med duty. The corporal says the cat already runs the station and the rest of you are contractors. When weather says, "No," you learn to hear it as, "Not yet." You taxi back with dignity, even when a part of your belly wants to pretend the sock was wrong or that the drizzle is. Character building. Historians still argue whether the ATA's relatively conservative weather minima saved more aircraft than they delayed, or whether pressure to keep the conveyor belt moving sometimes pushed pilots into cloud that had no exits. The accident boards speak in numbers. The logbooks answer with the quiet pride of lines drawn on days when saying, "No go," felt like doing nothing but was actually doing your whole job. There are, of course, tools. A few routes hide non-directional beacons like old lampposts, and some towers will mercy you a QDM bearing when politeness asks, but you never plan on it. Better to plan on the sky being its honest self. Pilot balloons rise, small red berries in the air, and the theodolite crew rolls their eyes at wind shear. You read their figures as if deciding on a hat. You will wear whatever is comfortable at 2,000 feet today, even if it's not your color. Rain changes cockpit manners. Everything glistens. Instruments blink their own little weather. You wipe the inside of the canopy with the back of a glove and feel the air promise to improve after lunch. You write, "After lunch," on the kneeboard as if scheduling the weather could trick it into courtesy. It sometimes works. More often it doesn't, and you learn the move called walking away with style. Debrief the map, drink tea that now correctly identifies as stew, and help the dispatcher reorder a day whose threads the wind chewed into lace. See fog plays hardest with twins. You plan a leg along the coast and find the coast has decided to be myth. So you step inland, talk to the Oxford as if she were a nervous ant, and keep hands light and options heavy. One engine drills in the head, two engines polite on the hands. You whisper. Your own voice steadies the cockpit better than any radio could. Passing showers clap their wet hands. You bow and carry on, damp but dignified. The best days are the most boring ones. High bases that invite you to a civilized altitude, visibility that admits the world exists, crosswinds that sign the non-aggression pact. On those days you find yourself narrating the weather like a nature walk. Cumulus humoring gardeners, Cirrus pretending it wrote the moon. You land with time to check the barograph in the Met shack and congratulate it on a day of gentlemanly curves. Light joke 3. You award the Isobars a medal for not wrestling in public. And then there are days like June before a very large invasion, when someone named Stagg once told generals to wait because the wind had not yet promised to be kind, and history minded him. You carry that story around not as theater but as technique. Big decisions by small maps, stubbornly readable. You add your tiny version each time you circle once, sigh, and postpone. The dispatcher will forgive you. The aircraft will thank you by continuing to exist. The logbook will applaud with a neat line that says, "Weather, no go, revised to 1400, delivered smiling." Back at the briefing table you update the doodles. Your goat and chalk company umbrella acquires a wind arrow and a small, smug sun on the other side of the board, just in case, and you write your own forecasts in the margin of the day. Patches of patience, clearing with sandwiches. The kettle whistles, correctly this time, and you decide the corridor rumor was true. Weather has moods, and the art is not to cure them but to choose when to visit. Your map dries on the radiator. Your pencil warms in your hand. The next Isobar decides to be kind. or at least legible. Dark arrives like a polite usher, dimming the countryside one notch at a time until even the hedgerows forget their green and remember their edges. The briefing warned you, blackout in force, NAV lights as ordered, no white torches anywhere that would tempt a bomber's curiosity. You tighten your flying jacket, tuck the kneeboard under its elastic, and tell yourself that night is just day with a different color palette and stricter manners. The air smells of damp grass and dope. The windsock is an obedient silhouette rehearsing one note. Somewhere the tea trolley finishes its sermon and the Met Corporal chalks, bases variable, with the resigned flourish of a person who knows the sky reads without replying. The field itself has agreed to be a rumor. Taxiway lamps are papered over to slits. A few hooded blue lamps huddle along the runway like parishioners. The control caravan shows two tiny windows of amber, precisely the right amount of civilization to prove you aren't alone. You've drawn your leg with more care than usual. Timings in big, bossy numbers, bearings double-checked, landmarks promoted from helpful to indispensable. You review the ritual, set QNH, check compass alive, tap the luminous paint on your hands and feet instruments, so the slow glow remembers its job. The stopwatch gets a twist. The map gets folded to the piece you can read with a glance and a prayer. Takeoff at night is oddly intimate. The runway starts as a narrow lane of suggestion and becomes a conversation between wheels and wisdom. You open the throttle and the world shrinks to noise and a stripe of confidence. Then the wheels whisper that ground is now optional, and you're in it. Black air that tastes of cold iron and damp hedges. Mainstream fact: British blackout rules during the war demanded strict light discipline. Many airfields used hooded low-intensity, chance, lamps or gooseneck fixtures, flare pads of shielded gooseneck lights, and occasionally portable, goose, lamps laid by a caravan to outline a landing tee. You thank whoever invented the dim blue fringe that makes your runway a fact, not a myth. Fly the instruments, an instructor said. Trust the attitude and the turn and slip. The horizon is on strike. So you give the artificial horizon the kind of attention you'd give a suspicious cake. Respectful, critical, ready to decline seconds. Your skin finds a rhythm, attitude, airspeed, rate of climb, compass, outside, where the darkness politely refuses to answer, then back again. Light joke 1. You inform the darkness you will not be signing for any unsolicited landscapes tonight. It sends only one hedgerow and a hint of a pond for consideration. Landmarks at night go to finishing school. A river is no longer blue. It's a patient absence of village lights. A black ribbon refusing to twinkle. A town becomes a hole in the dark where blackout takes its work seriously, or a scatter of hooded amber bulbs pretending to be stars that have learned punctuality. You count minutes to the next silhouette, rail bridge, water tower, the faint iron geometry of a viaduct, and let the stopwatch's tiny drama keep you honest. Your kneeboard notes talk louder at night. Road rail cross, 1410, factory roof, sawtooth silhouette, 2230, spire if moon agrees. The moon, union-minded, negotiates intermittent cooperation. You throttle back a whisker to keep the engine civilized and the brain oxygenated. The luminous strip on your compass card glows like a small halo. The drift meter earns its keep, a sliver of reality near your knee. You take a bearing off a far NDB, one of the few along this route, and file it under reinforcement rather than salvation. Historians still argue whether night ferrying without radio in so many types was brave, foolish, or simply inevitable given production pressure and wiring priorities. You make the argument irrelevant by doing the quiet arithmetic. Heading, time, fixed by silhouette, repeat. The blackout edits your vocabulary. Church spires disappear unless the moon promotes them. Instead, you love railway junctions that sketch thin bones against the town dark, canals that erase stars and disciplined lines, factories with sawtooth roofs that cut pieces out of the sky. You mark a wingtip downward to glance for the faintest glimmer where a river forgets itself at a weir. Quirky tidbit. Some pilots keep a pocket full of boiled sweets not only for sugar but to pop in their mouth during long black stretches. Keeps the jaw from clenching and reminds the brain there's a body attached to it. You tried the experiment. The sweet reports that your nerves taste like peppermint. Occasionally the wharf forgets itself enough to help. A coastal battery tests a searchlight for 3 seconds, discouraged, but reality leaks, and you file the angle and distance subconsciously. A station master, fond of aviators, has tilted blackout louvres so that his platform lamps make a private code, 2 short, 1 long, as if telling you, "Yes, this is the junction you want, but I didn't tell you that." You smile in the cockpit because the map just winked. Approach work at night is housekeeping with wings. You reach the vicinity of your destination by numbers and guess less than you did an hour ago. Then you lower a notch of flap, if the book allows, throttle to the sentence that means, "Landing is a conversation," and dial your brain to pattern. The field keeps its secrets until the caravan decides you've earned them. Then hooded lamps blink their soft confession. Runway here, flare path so, T across the end if preferred direction matters. You join the circuit with the decorum of a guest at vespers. Light joke too, you tell your shadow, which sometimes appears on cloud below like a shy cousin, that it may critique only after you've parked. Altitudes at night feel taller. You measure with the altimeter and with an old glider trick, how the runway changes shape. Long and narrow? Still high. Suddenly shorter? That dip was a field pretending to be a runway. You fly the approach by attitude, not by the ASI's flirtations, and you keep a whisper of power through the flare because black air likes to remove cushions without warning. The wheels meet grass with a private handshake. The flare path slides past as if nodding. You keep the roll straight with feet that have read this paragraph before. Then the blue lamps dwindle and you're taxiing, slower, slower, the runway left behind thoughtfully for the next pilot's nerves. The ground has its own night dialect. A bicycle with a hooded lamp leads you to parking. Follow me. In the grammar of pedals and patience. A corporal holds a shuttered lantern, blinking twice for stop, once for chocks. On some nights, the flare path is laid by hand from a lorry. A ladder of hooded lights hop down by 2 airmen who, by repetition, have become metronomes. You sign their chit. They nod with the confidence of people who create geography for a living. On rare evenings the fog comes like sleepwalking, quiet, even, inevitable. You call the go-around before the flare because your bones prefer altitude to doubt. The throttle answers, the horizon tilts back to instrument, and you climb to the circuit height with the reassuring memory that diversion fields exist on your kneeboard in ink. The control caravan signals with all this if it has the luxury. More often, it simply holds its breath and trusts you to be the person the notes wanted you to be. You set course for the relief ground whose farmer knows the etiquette of late visitors. He will meet you with a lantern that obeys the law, a glow ironically useful because it's so obedient, and a handshake that says he has watched more than one airplane turn patience into policy. Mainstream aside, folded under your log, some RAF stations used DREM, lighting systems, concentric rings and color codes to guide approaches in foul weather. Others relied on gooseneck lamps and signal all this by caravan. ATA pilots landed on both with the same unshowy competence, aided by luminous instruments painted with radium hand mixes that glowed a tired green. You glance at your own radium numerals, their soft ghosts of daylight, and decide you'll buy the paint a pint if it ever opens a tab. Your goat and chalk company umbrella, now doodled on the dispatch board with a crescent moon, acquires a tiny hood so as not to violate the blackout. The joke spreads. A corporal sketches it on a flare-path crate and writes, "Weather permitting, lamps acquiring permits." Light joke 3. You propose a new product line, goat and chalks, approved darkness, including tasteful silhouettes and compliant glows. The dispatcher says she'll stock it between string miles and biscuits. Homeward legs are gentler because the hard thing has happened and gone well. You keep the altitudes honest, the compass steady, and the minutes counting like a long yawn. The countryside is a velvet map now, edges and small hesitations. The aircraft purrs, either grateful or bored. You imagine every house containing a sleeping person and resolve not to do anything dramatic near chimneys. You find your field by the shape of the dark and the alignment of the lamps. You land as if you already lived here, because at night every runway wants you to behave like a local. Back in the office, you write, "Night," in the remarks column as if that one word can carry the entire hour you just walked through without a torch. It does, a little. You return the flare-path bicycle to its stack and thank the corporal whose Aldous wink kept time. You gently fold the map along its night crease and feel the waxed pencil lines smooth like a river stone under your thumb. Historians still argue whether night ferrying should have been rarer, that daylight alone could have moved the conveyor belt. The pile of next day chits answers that the belt didn't sleep, and somebody had to move the links in the dark. You promise yourself a boiled sweet and a sandwich with more confidence than lettuce. The billet smells of paraffin and relief. You lay the kneeboard on the chair and set the stopwatch on top like a paperweight. Before the light goes out you sketch one more tiny drawing, a flare path of 3 blue dots and a little T, and in the corner, a crescent moon minding its own business. You don't need the drawing. You make it anyway, in the same spirit that made you bend, look, and breathe before you let the wheels leave the ground. Night is a test in smaller fonts. You pass by reading every line. You notice the difference first in the waiting room. Boots beside heels that are practical rather than apologetic. Flying jackets cut to the same pattern even when the hips beneath them disagree. Hair pinned with a precision that says, "I make lists at work." The clipboard doesn't care. The dispatcher doesn't either. Your name moves down the board with airs, equal ink, equal errands, and the air learns to pronounce pilot without adding adjectives. The office door opens and in steps the reason this feels normal. Pauline Gower's calm, the kind that organizes reality by speaking softly and then getting on with it. She is not a speech, she's a system. Mainstream fact. Pauline Gower led the Air Transport Auxiliaries Women's Section from 1940, building a pathway in which women ferried everything from primary trainers to frontline fighters, and by 1943 ATA women received equal pay with men, the first state-backed equal pay arrangement many in Britain had ever seen. You hear it summarized as a policy. You watch it function as a day. A pilot in a skirt signs for a hurricane, tucks the ferry pilot's notes where yours live, and walks out to the flight line with the same deliberate stride you use when the wind argues. The ground crew's faces register the most satisfying expression in aviation, the look of people who only want the logbook filled and the machine returned without dents. The route assignments do a thing better than editorials. Women's names go on fighter runs as readily as on trainers. Hamble to West Hampnet with a Spitfire that smells like new varnish. Hatfield to Northolt with a Hurricane that will be someone's favorite by supper. White Waltham to Filton with an Oxford whose starboard engine has aristocratic opinions. The chalk map shows these legs braided with everyone else's, and your eyes adjust to a country where normal includes a woman in a Mae West climbing into a cockpit whose canopy is heavier than chivalry. Light joke 1. The only gallantry that survives dispatch is the kind that puts chalks insensibly and brings tea without spilling. You learn, quickly, that competence has local accents. One pilot hums through checks, another whispers them. A third taps each lever twice like a pianist who insists on being in tune with the throttle. In the mess, jokes circulate the way weather does. Flaps are for landing. Gossip is for trains. Outside, a Magister returns and a Spitfire leaves, and the office either swoons nor takes photographs. It writes times in columns and orders more string cut to miles. Historians still argue whether ATA's equal pay happened because fairness finally found a door or because urgency shoved the door off its hinges. At the dispatch table, the debate looks like arithmetic. Hours flown, machines delivered, routes closed. Arithmetic rarely blushes. The notes aren't pink or blue, they're bossy in one color. And the cockpits are democratic. Harness bite is a universal, as is the way a cold magneto smells. You share tricks shoulder to shoulder. How to keep your hair from inventing its own slipstream. How to stop the Spitfire's pneumatic brakes from turning a taxiway into embroidery. How to greet a Hurricane's radiator shutter as a friend rather than a plot twist. Quirky tidbit. A handful of pilots keep a tiny safety pin clipped to the lapel, ostensibly for maps that won't fold, actually for hair that thinks it is a windsock after landing. Nobody writes that in a manual. Everybody knows that Pauline's office measures success in squadrons fed. Her memos are quiet miracles, one paragraph that equalizes rosters, one line that says, "If bad weather holds you at a field, you hold yourself with it." One sentence that formalizes what has already happened outside. Type ratings are awarded on competence, not costume. You catch her looking at the board like a conductor at a rehearsal that will be a performance by tea time, and you realize leadership can sit down and still move the room. Not all routes are triumphs. Some are routine naps into weather that forgot its manners. On those days, the point is not to duel the cloud but to deliver the airplane and return with the pilot who will need a sandwich. Once, you're stuck at a maintenance unit with a woman who arrived in a Harvard just as the visibility turned into polite treacle. You split a railway timetable and a chocolate bar, trade fairy stories through the steam of mugs, and discover comfort in hearing your own habits described by a different mouth. Undercarriage checks that are almost superstitions, the way you both mark diversions with small penciled hearts. The odd joy in hearing a ground crew say, "We've been waiting for that cereal." There are shadows, and they're not only literal. Amy Johnson's name is spoken softly. Her loss in January 1941 rides like a respectful silence in the hangar rafters. The risk is never erased, only managed into acceptability by doctrine, minima, and the right of looking out of the window before believing a forecast. The accident board prints its minutes with a kindness that still does math. You meet the sober end of equality. Forms don't care who writes them after a mishap. You sign the same oath to better habits you'd sign if the signature were someone else's. Light joke 2. A senior ferryman says the board's pens weigh more than the airplane's. You resolve to keep yours light by using it only on chits, not explanations. What changes the world are the sightings. A farmer stands by a hedge and watches a Spitfire arrive with its tail wagging hello to the runway. He mentions it at tea and someone's aunt says, "One of ours is in fighters now." And the conversation moves forward without tripping. A station master watches a woman step off a wing, sign a form, and tuck hair behind an ear the way anyone does when a breeze has opinions. A fitter looks up from a panel and sees the new pilot is not a surprise but a timetable. The extraordinary becomes crowded out by the ordinary, the most revolutionary transformation aviation can offer. Equal pay arrives as a paragraph and settles as a practice. Pay packets match. The mess bill still stings in identical ways when the jam ration has been moody. The ledger yokes hours and shillings with even hands. You feel the balance in small, practical places. No apologetic murmur at the pay table. No. Just this once. At the dispatch hook. A thing in your shoulders relaxes you didn't know was braced. Mainstream aside inside your pocket. In 1943, ATA women's pay rose to parity with men's. Elsewhere in Britain people argued theory while you filed it as a line item and went flying. You learn how normalization sounds on the radio you don't have, like silence. No one calls for special flares. No one paints a name on a canopy because novelty would get in the way of schedules. Instead, someone at a squadron writes, "Thanks, lovely ship," and someone at the factory notes, "Pilot reported boost gauge flippant, rectified." The praise you collect is the same thin slice of cake everyone gets, a nod at the dispersal, a mug that stays filled when yours is empty, a penciled smiley, 2 dots and a curve, on the facing slip someone shouldn't have doodled but did. Routes educate attitudes. A woman flies a hurricane into a field where the controller's eyebrows attempt theater. 2 weeks later 3 more hurricanes arrive differently crude and the eyebrows are back to clerical work. At another base the mess steward forgets to remember anything at all. He pours tea with the speed of a man whose life is improved by boiling water, and you decide you love him a little. This is how policy becomes custom, repetitions that exhaust surprise. Historians still argue whether the ATA created a permanent path or a brilliant wartime detour. The answer may be yes to both. And you hope the map remembers these pencil marks after the rain. Light joke 3 arrives in the hangar when someone chalks on a toolbox. Warning: aircraft may be delivered by anyone who can land them. Underneath, a wag adds, and signed a chit. Beneath that, someone else draws the goat, and chalk company umbrella with a pair of wings. Because even your running joke has decided to pass its flight test. Laughter in a maintenance bay is a safe kind of weather. The day ends without applause, which is the point. A Spitfire is tucked under canvas, its coolant pings receding like a kettle deciding not to boil again. A woman pilot writes times into a logbook with a pencil that has earned a sharpener. You finish your own line, serial, out, in, remarks, and the clerk stamps both pages with the same date and the same sound, a little appointment kept between paper and ink. The billets smell of soap and paraffin and the odd, comforting aroma of tired leather. You lay out tomorrow's map without thinking to separate routes by pronoun. When lights out comes, you rehearse the day's arithmetic, weather, track, fuel, and quietly, the numbers under the top line, Hours flown by. We, not they. Pauline's door is shut now, but her memos have done their work. Your pool is a place where hands reach for chalks before adjectives, where equal pay came and then stopped being a topic because it started being a ledger. You drift towards sleep with the modest pride of a person who watched the new thing become the normal thing by doing it again, and again, and again, until even the map stopped blinking. The factory floor greets you like a bakery at dawn, warm varnish instead of bread, rivet guns ticking like cooling loaves, and a line of brand new airframes wearing paper tags on their noses like pastries with their names on. Your chit says which one is yours. The foreman taps the cereal with a knuckle as if to prove the numbers are fresh. The airplane looks surprised to be a noun already. You put your hand on the leading edge the way you pat a horse while reading the stable wall. Fed, watered, recently invented. Paper comes first. The acceptance certificate glows with official adjectives. The Form 700 lists what's been touched, torqued, and sworn at, and the release to service reads like a recipe someone actually followed. The fitter hands you a snag sheet. Pilot's Possibles list, compiled by the test crew. Boost gauge eccentric on Tuesdays. Canopy latch prefers compliments. Port brake artistic when hot. You love honest snags. They are the birdseed trails that keep afternoons from becoming inquiries. You sign with a pencil that smells of biscuit tin and seriousness, then read your ferry pilot's notes one more time to remind your hands what the levers call themselves here. The test bay doors roll aside with the gravity of a curtain lifting on a first performance. Your aircraft moves under its own intentions for the first time in front of you, the engine doing its best impression of a well-brought-up kettle. Run-up, greens, temps, pressures. Every dial is a promise the factory made this morning and you are now co-signing. The takeoff is a gentle argument that you win by not insisting, and within minutes you're tracing your waxed pencil line across a sky that smells slightly of primer and pride. The handoff choreography at the squadron end is its own little play, rightly famous in its tiny way. You side-slip into the circuit to keep your new paint from preening, land with decorum as if the grass might write you up, and let the prop's last turn tick the engine into silence while you think a small, tidy. There. Ground crew appear with the speed of people who know which forms wait for engines, not the other way round. A corporal catches your wingtip as if it were a plate he's been offered in a crowded pantry. An irk slides chalks like punctuation. Somewhere a sergeant looks at your tires and decides whether you're decent. You stay modest. You climb down with your paperwork sensibly visible. The store of the day is open. Logbook, acceptance, Form 700, ferry chit, and the precious snag list you've annotated in pencil knots. You hand them across like a tray of cups. The crew chief's hand is oil clean enough to hold paper without guilt. He reads while three other hands begin doing the physical version of reading. Latches checked, panels sniffed, rags tucked exactly where they live. Light joke 1. You suggest you could hold the ladder. Four faces give you polite affection and demonstrate all the ways that would slow them down. Mainstream fact. The Air Transport Auxiliary delivered well over 300,000 aircraft of more than 100 types during the war. Each delivery ended not with a photograph but with a transaction. Paper matched to serial matched to hands. That kept the front fed and the factories honest. The moment here is where the big number becomes one aircraft becoming one squadron's problem in the best possible way. You watch a leading aircraft man tick the tool control board as spanners go out and come back. Somewhere behind his head, the squadron's diary grows a page that will be spare on adjectives and rich in nouns. The aircraft is brand new, so the gun bays smell of cardboard and cosmoline instead of cordite. You note the absence and write it on the snag sheet not as complaint but as weather. Delivered unarmed per ATA policy. Site collimation unverified. The fuel tanks are polite as full as the ferry plan required. The coolant sits 50-50 like an orderly marriage. And the oxygen bottle reads the right kind of pressure for someone who will fly higher than you did. A radio tech opens a panel and swears softly in the dialect of resistors. You underline in your remarks that you did not attempt to charm a set that wasn't part of your job. Light joke 2. You confess you can make a wireless behave simply by not touching it. The wireless man, who has a doctorate in grudges, nods gravely. The magic moment is the serial number handshake. You say it aloud. 2 letters, 3 numbers, the aircraft's baptism, while the crew chief echoes it like a priest who also knows where the battery lives. He writes it on a chalkboard under, "In today," and suddenly the machine belongs to a tally that matters to someone's evening count. A pilot from the flight wanders up with a grin that's already airborne, eyes the wing route like a man seeing the future from very close range, and asks, as politely as appetite allows, "How does she feel?" You give the important adjectives: straight, cool, honest, boost gauge, flippant when bored, and he nods like you told him the road home has 2 lanes and a decent pub. Quirky tidbit. Some factories put tiny chalk messages inside access panels. "Hello 92 SQN, treat me kindly. Tell Joe we did the rivets proper." That only the first curious fitter will ever see. A few ground crew answer in pencil before the paint goes on. The conversation lives in metal and inside jokes. You once found a little pressed paper flower under a seat rail. Someone's superstition from the assembly bench. So you wrote, "Delivered with a stowaway violet," on the snag list and left it there. The squadron stuck it above the tea urn until it wilted into memory. Handover includes humility. You confess the crosswind made the flare linger a hair. Note that the port brake warmed unequally during taxi. Admit, quietly, that the canopy latch appreciates a double check because it likes drama in turns. The sergeant writes, "Check canopy AR," on his own pad and whistles, which in this hangar means both. "We see you," and "We've seen worse." Historians still argue whether factory acceptance tests or squadron receipt inspections prevented more mishaps, or whether the real safety lay in this overlapping human Venn diagram. Pilot, fitter, rigger, instrument basher, each catching the other's blind spots. Watching the riggers sight down the elevators while the instruments man kisses the altimeter with a screwdriver, you vote for the overlap. There is ceremony without pomp. Someone signs your chit, someone stamps your time, someone offers tea like it's a wrench in the right size. The flight commander leans in just long enough to say, "Good," a word that in military dialect means, "Thank you," multiplied by schedules. You add the aircraft's new address to your log because you enjoy the sensation of aiding geography. Light joke 3. You whisper to the spinner, "You're going to meet clouds with opinions," and for a second you believe it winks. Not everything is a gleaming debut. Sometimes you bring a veteran back from repair, her paint slightly paler around fresh panels, her serial older than your logbook. Those handoffs are different. Ground crew greet her like a dog that ran off and found home again. The paperwork is thicker, mod forms, rectifications, a little family of signatures that make a necklace. You still present the bundle like bread. They still take it like proof of life. You may be sentimental. The rigger definitely is. And sometimes the handover is halfway. Weather menaces, the squadron dispersal is a rumor on a satellite strip, and you park on a temporary field where the only office is a bicycle and a clipboard. The ritual contracts to essentials: cereal, chit, snag notes, handshake. A lorry with a drum arrives to give the aircraft a drink, and a mechanic climbs a ladder as if he's been chasing this machine across counties. You sign on the bonnet of a truck and the ink behaves like good dog manners in rain. Your logbook stanza for these days is short but heavy. From X factory to YSQN Z sector, delivered 1.05 remarks per snag. Yet your bones know they carried one more machine into the stream where machines turn into stories. Mainstream aside, you tuck into your margin 88 policy forbade aerobatics, formation, and all the flourishes that make headlines. The job's glamour was honesty. Fly it there, tell the truth about it, give it to the people who will ask it to be brave. You suspect, honest, is a better metal than most thought. On the way back to the pool, the railway chooses to be on time. You sit opposite two soldiers who smell of Blanco and cigarette papers. They look at your jacket wings and practice not staring. You offer the phrase that closes 1,000 British curiosities. Just ferrying. They nod like that is exactly the right size of miracle. Out the window a squadron's flare path sleeps under tarpaulins like a set table waiting for evening. You imagine the airplane you just delivered waking up to its first scramble and hope your pencil note about the boost gauge made somebody choose a different swear word. When you sign in, the dispatcher doesn't ask for adjectives. She asks for the times and smiles at the tidy columns. You hang up your jacket, tick your name from out to rail return, and write one more line on the day's chalkboard under delivered. 1X type, cereal, snag list noted, crew smiling. It is ridiculous to record moods. You do it anyway. Eager ground crews are part of the machinery, and the machine runs better when people get to be glad in it. You tidy the edges of your day, map refold, notes back in the pocket where they live, pencil stub thanked and replaced. In the billet you find a smear of dope on your cuff and leave it there on purpose. It is the smell of nouns turning into verbs. Factory to squadron, paper to flying, you to us. You drift towards sleep with the country's quiet conveyor in your head, benches, bays, test runs, your line in the sky, dispersals, teapots, and chits. The airplane you patted this morning now has fingerprints other than yours. That is the point. Your week begins like a hat stand in a gale. 3 hooks, 5 hats, all convinced they belong on your head. Monday writes Magister on the board and winks. Wednesday circles, hurricane, as if improving your posture. Friday shrugs, Oxford, and adds a discreet night, because it has read your file and enjoys comedy. The dispatcher calls it multi-type utilization. Your kneeboard calls it please use pencil. You call it the party trick the ATA expects everyone to perform by T, with the ferry pilot's notes, as the world's politest stage manager. The trick is not glamour, it's grammar. You walk onto the grass knowing that each cockpit speaks a dialect, and your job is to stop translating and start thinking in the language of the instrument panel in front of you. So you stack the scripts. For the Magister, fixed gear, no flaps, carb heat honest, tail holds opinions, fly it like a bicycle you respect. For the Hurricane, radiator shutter manners, boost that upstages conversation, undercarriage that must be asked nicely and confirmed with 2 greens and no daydreaming. For the Oxford, twin prop courtesy, mixtures that prefer courtship to commands, feathering drills rehearsed until your ankles could testify under oath. You touch each lever before you need it, say its name aloud, and promise all the other levers you will not confuse them with cousins. Mainstream fact: ATA pilots routinely ferry dozens of different types with minimal conversion, often a short cockpit check in the standardized ferry pilot's notes, rather than lengthy dual instruction. So a single week could see a pilot hop from a single-seat fighter to a twin-engine trainer to a light bomber, each with different systems for undercarriage, flaps, and fuel. You write that sentence in your head the way one writes an epitaph for complacency. Then you pick up a pencil and make a list labeled, persuasively, "Not today." Raise wheels in a fixed-gear trainer, select mixture when meaning prop, taxi the spit as if brakes were a suggestion. Monday's Magister behaves like a friendly dog who has read the manual. The tail wags if your feet go vague. The engine purrs if you pet the throttle. The airspeed indicator writes its numbers in round, cheerful script. You land by attitude and patience, three-pointing because manners matter in wool socks. It's a confidence sandwich, humble at the edges, competence in the middle. Light joke 1. You tell the Magister you're adding, good listener, to its character reference. It pretends to blush by showing an extra 5 knots on rollout. Wednesday's hurricane asks you to remember what responsibility feels like. The cockpit welcomes your knees as if you belong. The throttle has heft. The boost gauge has opinions you will respect. You run the checks the notes insist on. Radiator set. Prop where the book says it won't sulk. Mixture poised like a diplomat. And then you field the aircraft's first question. Are you with me? You are. Rotate as recommended, positive climb, gear up with the don't look clever, look certain cadence. 2 greens go to none, the light keeps its promise, and you breathe in a measured paragraph. The hurricane flies as if carrying weather insurance, solid, kind, ready to forgive a flare that lingers. You sign its chit, handsome, and mean it even though that is not a recognized engineering term. Friday's Oxford is a schoolmaster with 2 voices. Taxiing requires geometry and a sense of humor. The brake lever asks for finesse. The rudder bars demand choreography. You brief yourself on symmetry like it's a religion. Both throttles together unless you're praying for a newspaper headline. Up and away, she's a patient teacher. On one engine, even as a drill, she's a strict examiner who expects you to quote the notes by heart. Dead foot, dead engine. You murmur, then restore the drill because today is practice, not a sermon on single-engine performance. You thank the aircraft for the lesson by flying the rest of the leg like a person who has recently remembered they enjoy landing with both propellers turning. The cockpit swap itself becomes a ritual with talismans. Before climbing in, you touch the undercarriage selector and pronounce its truth, fixed, down, or, we will talk later. You find the flap lever and greet it by name. You shake hands with the fuel selector and confirm you are not about to feed an engine with the memory of petrol. You verify the location of magnetos off, because peace loves shortcuts that work. Quirky tidbit. Some ferry pilots tied a short loop of string from wrist to throttle during early weeks of conversions, not to restrain the hand, but to remind the brain that the hand was attached to a person who should not pull the mixture when excited. You tried it once, felt silly, and then felt grateful when a bump sent your fingers searching. The string blinked. Throttles, darling. Between types, the notes sharpen your edges. You read them like poetry before you move a single lever. Hurricane, pneumatics for flaps and brakes. Oxford, Trims where your elbow will accidentally live. Mind the tendency to bump them. Magister, airspeed optimistic. Land by sight and seat. Your pencil adds your own marginalia. Hurricane likes power on Lake Oxford. Don't let the nose write checks for the wheels, Magister. Tail first in crosswind or it invents folk dancing. Light joke 2, you threaten to tattoo. Undercarriage true? On your wrist. But the string is cheaper and less likely to scandalize billets. The calendar is unromantic about your learning curve. Tuesday adds a Harvard because variety is the mother of humility. Its flaps are honest. Its manners are American. Its throttle quadrant, a cornucopia of opportunities to be wise or foolish. You rehearse mixtures and props like scales, speak to the pneumatic brakes with the accent you used on the spit, and translate units of measure on the fly, muttering. Inches of manifold, not pounds of booze, like a person reciting a spell with loose change in their mouth. Historians still argue whether the ATA's conversion on paper method lowered accidents through standardization or raised them through overconfidence, whether rapid multi-type exposure built an airmanship that modern single-type. Specialists can't imagine or simply gambled on quick wits and good weather. You hold the debate at arm's length while doing the only thing that makes it boring. You follow the book, you never assume, you say the checks out loud, and you plant your ego in the long grass by the boundary fence until you're parked. What saves you, again and again, is the habit of rehearsed mistakes. In quiet minutes you sit in an empty cockpit and mime the blunder you refuse to make, reaching for flaps and finding gear, shutting a fuel cock when you meant to switch tanks, stroking a brake in a taildragger as if it were a house cat and discovering it is actually a tiger. You let the wrong hand move, and then talk it down kindly. You do this enough times that when the surprise arrives in the air, a gust, a bump, a dial sulking, the right habit presents itself like a friend with good timing. Handovers multiply the feeling of double life. On Monday you land at a maintenance unit where the riggers tease the magister like an old dog. On Wednesday you taxi a hurricane into a fighter dispersal where ground crew lift chocks as if they're tasting Christmas. On Friday you shut an Oxford down outside a training wing where someone already has a checklist and a jug waiting. Each place signs your chit with a different flourish. Your logbook becomes a scrapbook of penmanship and weather. The week keeps score in little ways. Your shoes remember which rudder pedals bit with enthusiasm. Your wrists recall the weight of different throttles. Your left thumb knows the landing light switch tries to hide in the hurricane and swans about in the Oxford. Your nose associates varnish with factories and hot glycol with fighter pens. Even your boiled sweets learn politics. Peppermint for single-seat nerves, barley sugar for twin-engine diplomacy. Light joke 3. You propose to the dispatcher a ration tied to type, extra chocolate for pneumatic brakes, bonus biscuit for retractables that retract only when flattered. She approves in spirit, declines in stock. And then there are the days when the swaps happen without paper walls. You climb out of a hurricane at a squadron that answers the telephone mid-sentence. Sign your name while a broad-shouldered Irk tucks the aircraft under his arm metaphorically. And 5 minutes later a corporal points at an Oxford needing to go 2 counties west before tea. You follow your own rule. Walk around even when the runway is watching. Find the fuel selector while your feet find the pedals. Say the verbs out loud. And the swap lands inside you like another gear engaging. The mind is remarkable. It learns to carry 3 cockpit layouts at once with no drama because drama would interfere with going home. Toward week's end you treat yourself to a reread of the Spitfire page in the notes. Not because you're flying one tomorrow, you might, but because reading that clip prose feels like breathing better air. You underline the break lover sentence again, present 2 fingers to the imaginary handle, and smile at how ordinary extraordinary has become. The Goat and Chalk Company umbrella on the dispatch board now wears 3 little icons above it: trainer, fighter, twin. Because even jokes are keeping up with the syllabus. On Saturday, the pool invents mercy. You ferry a tiger moth to a grass strip where the farmer signs the chit with hands that look like hedgerows, and the tea is the kind that tells you you've been brave without making noise about it. The wind is polite. The sun remembers what gold is. You do your checks because that is how you say grace now: fuel, mags, mixture, prop, not here, undercarriage, fixed and honest, flaps, none, stop asking, harness, hood. You lift, turn, and recite the week backward as if it were a lullaby: Magister, Hurricane, Oxford, Harvard, and the sky nods as if to say, yes, you may keep them all, provided you also keep the habit that made them survivable. At lights out, you set your wristwatch beside the notes, and stare at both until they look like cousins. Tick, tick, check, check. Multi-type was a headline on Monday. It is a diary by Sunday. You are not less tired. You are differently tidy inside. Tomorrow the board will write a serial and a type and the name of a field that thinks grass is for landing on and cattle are for looking decorative. You will pocket your string mile, sharpen your pencil, pat the undercarriage lever like a dog that has learned its name, and go. Variety didn't make you clever. It made you careful, which is better. You launch alone because the rule is the rule. No formation, no showing off, no radio most days, and certainly no guns. The airplane you're nursing is either fresh from a factory or freshly repaired, and your job description is not tempt fate, it's arrive. Dispatch underlines it with their pencil voice. Solo ferry, standard heights, standard routes, standard manners. The sky does not applaud, but it does make room for people who behave. Mainstream fact: ATA ferries flew unarmed and usually without working radios, particularly in trainers and early single-seat fighters straight from the line. Orders forbade formation flying, aerobatics, and any deviation from established corridors, precisely to keep the conveyor belt predictable and the anti-aircraft crews unalarmed. You can feel the policy in your bones: routes that arc around balloon barrages, altitudes that slide beneath bomber lanes and above chimney gossip, circuit entries that read like etiquette more than swagger. Alone is not lonely when the air has been marked into lanes. You learn the airways that aren't printed on your ordnance map but might as well be. Daylight legs at modest heights that keep you under the oxygen conversation and out of the way of bomber streams. Coastal schemes that give you one side of horizon even if the weather forgets itself. Inland threads that avoid towns encircled by barrage balloons whose cables write stern letters to careless wings. Your kneeboard carries more notems in pencil than any teleprinter could manage. Portsmouth, balloons many, Thames, do not test, docks, edgy today, salute from afar. You treat every rooftop gun as a colleague who needs a quiet day. And radio means your voice lives in your head and in your hands. When you're lucky, the set in a fighter is installed in civil, and a homing station might grant you a QDM bearing like a discreet arm on your shoulder. But most days the box either isn't wired yet, or the aerial is a polite rumor, and you trust the compass and the clock the way you trust a sober friend to hold the latter. If you must call, there's the emergency, darky, network on VHF. The one phrase you keep tucked beside your conscience and oxygen if fitted, but its very presence in your pocket makes you behave carefully so you never need to say it aloud. Unarmed is not a feeling so much as a discipline. You do not climb to gawk at contrails. You do not follow a formation to see where it's going. If a stranger aircraft draws near, you keep your heading as if you're minding your own soup in a crowded canteen. You make yourself look boring from the side, a silhouette with no opinions. Light joke 1, you imagine painting, just delivering, under the wing, but the maintainer's glare in your memory cancels the idea and spares the dope. Altitudes become theology. The brief sets you in trenches, under the balloon floors and over the hedges, away from the bomber highways and beneath the fighter playgrounds. 1,500 to 3,000 feet is a comfort band on clear days, high enough to think and low enough to land by choice rather than surprise. Over water you climb as the engine and notes suggest, calculating the minutes you'd prefer not to swim. You learn the smell of oxygen bottles and the taste of humility when the needle says you can stay lower and still do your job. Your pencil writes, "Height is kindness," across the top of the day's map as if the atmosphere might read it and nod. Recognition is a parlor trick shared by strangers who hope to remain so. Wiggle the wings once on approach, not the aerobatic kind, the "Hello, I am a leaflet" kind. Keep turns gentle near defended areas. Fly the briefed run-in when a field expects arrivals from a certain quadrant. When the caravan flashes the Aldous with the polite equivalent of "State your business," you answer with a circuit done to the book's tempo, not your heart's. Quirky tidbit. Some ferry pilots pinned a small white handkerchief inside the canopy rail as a personal superstition. A pocket. "Don't shoot, I'm housekeeping." It convinced no one official and comforted exactly one person, the hand that pinned it. Your pockets carry nothing a duel would admire. A silk map, a whistle, a barley sugar, the ferry pilot's notes, a pencil with more miles than legs. Even your aircraft carries nothing provocative. No ammunition, often no guns installed, sometimes blank ports and a brand new wing that still smells of paper tags. The emptiness lightens takeoff and landing but also lightens your options. If the air grows unfriendly, you have only 3 weapons: heading, height, and the decision to leave the conversation immediately. Routes and altitudes teach you to be the opposite of interesting. Cross the coastline at right angles. Don't linger along it like a bad smell. Avoid the rectangular shadows where a gunnery range practices philosophy. Don't cut corners around the balloon zone because cables age badly and pilots regret well. The dispatcher's finger, tapping the map, becomes a kind of conscience. Here if weather sulks, here if engine is whimsical, here if you promise to behave, which you did. You say yes until the word loses its adjectives and becomes practice. Historians still argue whether the unarmed, solo discipline reduced overall risk by removing the temptation to improvise, or increased exposure by sending pilots singly through skies that sometimes collected trouble. Whether predictability protected you from friendly anxiety or made you a slow, obvious target on days when the enemy machine arrived by accident. Your opinion is not a thesis. It's a habit. Do the brief. Look out. Leave early if the horizon writes a threat on its eyebrows. Your survival curve, you suspect, is drawn less by equipment and more by boredom carefully chosen. Weather pulls its old tricks but with nightshades on. Undercast that makes a chessboard of cloud and moon. Coastal haze that lays itself like tracing paper between you and good sense. At those moments you value no radio, because it forces patience, Either divert to the field you penciled with a small star or sit on the safe side of the trouble and eat the sandwich dispatch told you to pack. Light joke 2. You tell the cloud you're on its side politically but must oppose it on a procedural basis. The cloud sends a polite drizzle in reply. You memorize the map of light discipline as if you were learning a new alphabet. Towns are blanks, docks are darker blanks. Rail yards sometimes blink with the authority of men who have been told to move the nation at night and will not stop because you are nervous. Fighters thread up above, their engines sewing a high hem you're glad to wear as a hem and not a collar. Bombers parade even higher, purposeful cities. You look down and write and swear fealty to grass. Without guns, your hands sharpen their other skills. Engine husbandry becomes chivalry. Mixture where it won't sulk. Temperatures in the good housekeeping range. Boost only as much as the notes bless. You avoid violent throttle like a bad metaphor. You plan descents that make pistons forgive you. If the engine clears its throat, you offer it a checklist and a place to land rather than a pep talk and a cliff. Light joke 3. You name your throttle, diplomacy, and your mixture, T, because both solve more problems when applied gradually. Paperwork reflects the quiet doctrine. Your chit reads, delivered solo. Your logs remarks box murmurs. Radio anile, unarmed, wins layered but civil. And the acceptance signature at the far end proves that predictability is a kind of courage. Mainstream aside folded into your mind, Britain's layered air defense and offensive streams only work when corridors are obeyed. Ferrying's contribution is obedience with a timetable. You add, obedience pleasant, to the virtues column. Even if nobody else keeps such a ledger. On rare days trouble comes anyway. A fighter curious at your wing. Flak that coughs twice and then remembers its manners. A barrage cable you sight at the last salvation second. You stick to the script. You show your wings without showing off. And you aim for the part of the sky that looks like it prefers paperwork to drama. Later, in the mess, you do not tell a story about how exciting it was. You tell one about how well the sandwich kept. Back at the pool, the Goat and Chalk Company umbrella on the board acquires 2 new glyphs. A neat crossed-out pistol, no guns, and a very small radio with an X, don't count on it. The dispatcher adds a caption in tiny chalk, deliveries happen, bravery optional, boredom ideal. You sign your log, note your height bands, and feel that rare, handsome fatigue that comes from a day when nothing novel happened on purpose. You sleep well when the compass card still glows behind your eyelids and the only voice you remember is your own, reciting checks and mileposts and promises. If the larger war is a choir of noise and thunder, your part is the sustained middle note that lets the tune exist. Unarmed, alone, and very precisely on time, you become the kind of quiet without which songs don't sound like songs. You develop a superstition for numbers that add up politely. Before each job you sit at the dispatch table with a pencil that thinks it's a ruler, and you behave like a person who would rather arrive with fuel unspent than be remembered for arithmetic that ran out. The triangle on your map, speed, time, distance, gains a 4th corner called petrol, and your kneeboard acquires a new sermon. Range is a plan, reserves are a promise. You flip your ferry pilot's notes to the fuel page and copy the figures that matter into the margin where your eye will trip over them in flight. Consumption at climb, at cruise, at the polite economy the book calls best endurance. The aircraft will tell you its mood by the needle. Your job is to nod, adjust, and never pretend optimism is a system. The slide rule comes out like a pocket oracle. Yours is a Dalton circular computer, the RAF's familiar disc, worn smooth at the edges by thumbs that counted weather. Mainstream fact: British pilots, ATA included, commonly use Dalton navigation computers, variants of the RAF Mk8, to turn true airspeed, wind, and fuel flow into ground speed, drift, and endurance. It was the same honest plastic handcard tool that planned sorties and ferry trainers, the E6BS Commonwealth cousin. You set TAS opposite the wind dot, watch the ground speed pop out like a well-behaved dancer, and turn to the other side where fuel and time share a dance floor. Gallons per hour here, hours there, convert to minutes where your nerves live. You write the results twice because ink dries faster on the second copy. You give yourself a reserve like a tip you intend to leave, not an afterthought, a courtesy that proves you know service when you see it. Dispatch says, 30 minutes over destination. Your instructor whispers, more if water is between you and tea. And your bones add, and another if the weather is inventing itself. You mark the sectors where fuel will cross particular polite thresholds and pencil. Divert if here, like a road sign. Light joke 1. You invent a tiny deity called Saint Endurance of the last half hour, and tuck a barley sugar under the kneeboard as an offering. Twins teach patience with symmetry. The Oxford's tanks are like siblings with different appetites. You feed them in turn and keep the needles friends. You jot a swap schedule on a strip of masking tape. 20 minutes are 20 minutes. Repeat until both needles descend like gentlemen. Single-seaters carry fewer choices but more opinions. Wing tanks that need a certain order. Fuselage tanks that alter center of gravity like a moody dinner guest. Reserve cocks that are shy until spoken to clearly. The notes are specific. Use starboard first. Reserve for take OFF/landing. Switch off when established. And you practice the muscle memory at a picnic table until your hand reaches the right valve even if woken rudely from a dream about jam. Mixture management is both courtesy and thrift. Climb rich unless the book blesses a leaner climb. Cruise at the mixture that spares plugs and spares gallons. Avoid the red end of economy where the engine develops opinions you will later call snags. The Harvard page gives you inches of manifold and RPM like a recipe. You follow it the way bakers follow ovens that differ by temperament. Historians still argue whether wartime-leaning doctrines traded a whisper of engine wear for another 20 miles of range at a time when miles were worth more than valves, or whether pilots' caution kept engines fat and flights short. Your practice is a compromise. Lean politely at cruise when notes and cylinder head temp agree, but never fast talk a piston that wants a drink. You plan contingency like a miser hiding biscuits. Headwind worse than advertised by 5 knots? There goes 8 minutes on a 1-hour leg. You write, -8, in your margin and don't pretend you'll get it back by wishing. Shower lines holding hands across your route. Draw a dog leg with a fuel sum that admits both the detour and the dignity of arriving with spare. You hand the dispatcher your chit with your sums in the corner. She glances, approves, and circles diversion fields in pencil so thick it looks like underlining. The office doesn't clap for clever fuel plans. It simply keeps you on the list of people who return. Water adjusts the volume of the voice in your head. A short sea hop, Solent with Firth of Clyde manners, still earns more petrol and more superstition. Climb to gliding distance is the phrase your instructor made you write 5 times. You still say it aloud at the coast as if the ocean were a committee taking minutes. Your pockets carry survival exactly the way doctrine imagined they should, and a few ways doctrine never thought to write down. The Mae West life jacket sits like a resigned ant, CO2 bottle checked, oral inflation tubes looking like sly smiles. If the type has a C-type dinghy pack, the RAF's K-type, you confirm the lanyard runs from your harness to the dinghy's toggled sense of occasion. Mainstream aside, RAF/ATA kits often packed a one-man dinghy, hand/CO2 inflation, a small sail or sea anchor, pump, bailer, repair patches, a heliograph mirror, whistle, dye marker, fluorescent to paint the sea green, varied pistol and cartridges, concentrated rations, barley sugar, chocolate, and sometimes water in tins or a desalting kit, a silk escape map, small compass, and matches completed the cheerful minimalism. Your personal satchel adds the human bits. Silk map folded into your inside pocket where it won't be shy. Tiny prismatic compass that thinks it is clever. Signal mirror whose backside rehearses your skeptical face. Whistle tied to your jacket with a string that will not fail you in the wet. You tuck a little packet of barley sugars and 2 squares of chocolate into a corner where even regret could find them. Quirky tidbit. Some pilots sneak a small pencil flare of their own into the Mae West pocket. For insurance. And more than one has been rescued because fluorescent paint made a green halo the size of a polite field around a dinghy no bigger than a sigh. The drill for water, never glamorous in briefings, often dignified in practice, lives on your kneeboard in 6 lines. 1. Mayday if anyone pretends to listen. 2. Harness tight. 3. Fuel off. 4. Hood open. 5. Land along swell if you have choices. 6. Out, pull, count to 2, into dinghy, flare if company. You recite it now and then at altitude when the sea looks friendly, because friendly is the first lie water tells. Light joke 2. You inform the channel you are not taking interviews today. It puffs a little and pretends to be amused. Range is not always geometry. Sometimes it's weather politics. A tailwind gives you smug arithmetic. You spend none of it. A headwind steals your schedule. You try not to steal back by leaning more than the book likes. The worst is a wandering wind that keeps changing its mind. You anchor your sums to worst case and write. Early divert if late here. At the midpoint. You look at the fuel sight tubes. Where fitted, you tap the gauge only once because tapping twice feels like superstition, and you trust time more than needles because time is the only instrument that doesn't wobble when you look away. The relief fields along your line acquire personalities. One has a farmer who pumps your dinghy for practice and won't let you leave without a slice of bread that tastes of civilization. Another stocks flares like church candles and insists on testing your whistle because he believes in acoustics. You owe them, so you bring accurate times and tidy circuits, and leave their grass unruffled by impatience. Historians still argue whether the ATA's firm reserve doctrine slowed the conveyor belt marginally in ways industry fretted about, or whether those 30 minutes saved more airplanes, and therefore sorties, by converting, nearly, into, certain, thousands of times. You lean your pencil against certainty and find it sturdier. Fuel cocks, you learn, are the most introverted objects in the cockpit. Twins hide them far apart, so you must choose deliberately. Singles hide them where only shame finds them after a splutter. You trace the lines with 2 fingers before starting, again at warm-up, again before takeoff, and once more when the second church spire appears where your kneeboard promised it would. Light joke 3. You consider sending the fuel selector a valentine. You complete me, went on, but decide flowers would be cheaper and less likely to jam. You put survival on your person, not on an aircraft part that might decide to go its own way. The silk map, North Sea on one side, France and rivers on the other, warms to your ribs. The tiny compass rides a string like a shy lark. A waterproof match tin soldiers beside a folded bit of oiled silk that thinks it's a tent. If the type carries a dingy pack, you sit on destiny with a new appreciation for upholstery. You tie a small cord from your wrist to the dinghy's inflation lanyard. Not tight, just honest. Because wet hands have been known to lose polite thoughts. And yet most days the ritual pays you in boredom. You land with an hour still in the tanks because you planned it that way. And the ground crew shakes the wing and hears a slosh that is your favorite music. You write. Arrived with plus 52 minutes. In the remarks and feel the way bakers feel when bread rises on time. Back in the mess you draw a little fuel bowser next to the goat, and chalk company umbrella on the chalkboard and write. Gratitude for petrol, especially when not needed. The dispatcher adds. Range is a love language. In small neat capitals you pretend not to admire. If you ever need the satchel for real, you hope the choreography rehearsed in warm rooms will appear in cold wind unbidden. Hood open, breath counted, straps known, tug as trained. People do live, dye spreads, mirrors flash, engines of other people arrive with ropes and hot mugs. You file that as a future you may never meet and continue planning legs that end on grass with chalks, not on water with adjectives. The logbook earns a new column in your mind, fuel truthfulness, and the pages fill with ticks in a row that looks like restraint. Slide rule back into its sleeve, Dalton's windside wiped with your sleeve where pencil stained it. Notes, folded shut on the speeds that spared you gallons and embarrassment. You close the day with a sum that still pleases a child who once hoarded toffees. Miles planned, miles flown, gallons imagined, gallons politely used. Being necessary is the nicest way to be tired. Being prudent is the nicest way to be necessary. You meet fog the way you meet an elderly aunt at a station. Respectfully, hat in hand, pretending you had planned to carry her luggage. It rolls and not as weather but as policy, knitting hedgerows into one continuous shrug and filing a notice of temporary closure with every landmark you had meant to love. You do the ritual that has saved more hours than heroics. Admit what you can't see, keep wings level, count to a calm number, and reach inside your skull for the list titled When the Map Turns to Milk. You drew the list on your kneeboard because someone made you, and today you're grateful to that person. Divert to the first relief strip star marked on your chart. Call it relief, not random field, a phrase that disciplines your choices. Turn 30 degrees to stay clear of towns you can't see but whose anti-aircraft crews can still do arithmetic. Descend only if the world beneath you has edges. If it doesn't, climb a polite amount, because height is forgiveness in installments. You put the throttle where the engine purrs like a contented kettle and let the clock walk you to the first honest option. Mainstream fact. Britain's wartime landscapes sprouted relief landing grounds and satellite strips. Grass fields tended by small crews and often disguised from the air. To catch diversions, disperse squadrons, and keep training moving under changeable weather. Many were farm meadows improved with rolled turf, drainage, and a windsock that learned humility. You fly toward one now, its name a tiny parenthesis on your map, its reality a rectangle of slightly more obedient grass hidden under a fog that can't decide if it really means it. The trick is not courage, it's etiquette. Etiquette starts with circling where it's legal to see. You stay outside the imagined circuit until ground appears not as rumor but as grammar. Hedge, gate, a pond that belongs to a pond. If visibility is still a sulk, you let the field come to you slowly, skirting above the fog's thinning edge until a windsock shows a faint orange opinion. You add a whisker of flap, only if the note's like the notion, and keep a spoonful of power in the flare, because fog eats depth perception for breakfast and then asks for seconds. When wills meet grass, you roll long and straight like a person who knows he has landed on kindness. A bicycle arrives as if conjured. Hooded lamp, mudguard, a corporal who looks exactly like all corporals who have met aircraft on unhelpful mornings. He points with 2 fingers to the spot where you should park, blinks once for chalks, twice for enough, and nods at the windsock as if to say, sorry about the performance. You switch off to silence so deep you can hear fog thinking. The corporal's grin offers that smallest of luxuries, a verdict. Tea, he says, or maybe he says, hanger, or we've a bench, but it sounds like, you did the right thing, which is the sentence you needed more than a parade. Field craft begins with your feet. You don't stomp the ground cruise grass into ruts, and you don't assume the field exists for you. You ask where they'd like your wheels, you taxi with a light brake touch that would pass for flirting, and you sign their chit as if it were a thank you note. The farmer may be on the committee. Quirky tidbit, some relief fields kept a bell, an actual church bell, retrieved from a barn, to signal. Fog in, put the kettle on. Brung twice for. Diversion inbound. Thrice for. Someone is about to land near the sheep. You hear a distant clang now and imagine porcelain lining up for duty. When the fog thickens again and you're committed to patience, you visit the office that isn't an office, half a Nissen hut, a table that believes in pencils, a map with corners curled like satisfied cats. The corporal draws, whether with his finger on the tin mug's condensation, drift this way, clearer toward the lane, murk toward the canal. You add the notes to your own map with the reverence due local scripture. Light joke one, you propose to file the mug as unofficial meteorological equipment. The corporal says it's already on strength and now tranks the barometer. Some diversions are half social calls. A woman from another pool sits on a wingroot chewing a biscuit that has watched a war. She raises it like a toast and pats the damp fabric with a fondness that would read as eccentricity if it weren't so practical. She shows you how she ties her scarf to the throttle quadrant in pea soup, not to restrain the hand, but so the hand remembers it belongs to a person who has practiced not panicking. You offer a barley sugar. She offers a pinch of pencil graphite to wax the pencil line on your map so drizzle beads away. The barter economy of weather begins at the edge of visibility. If the fog never leaves, the etiquette graduates to the farmer. You walk the hedge to the farmhouse in your flying jacket that reads as uniform even when it doesn't, and you introduce yourself the way dispatch taught you, name, unit, apology first, request second. We've landed in your patience. You say, may I borrow a telephone and a corner of your air? A teapot appears by common law. A child stares as if winged creatures are supposed to be wilder. A dog decides your furniture. You phone the pool, report the diversion, and speak the aircraft's serial thrice so the map at White Waltham can lay down a thread that says, safe. Historians still argue whether Hayfield landings proved a golden age of low-speed, low-weight types or simply a Britain that still had landscapes polite enough to land in. Whether post-war concrete erased an airmanship muscle that fog built, a habit of seeing fields not as trespass but as grace. You filed the debate under. Nice to discuss, unhelpful now. And go help the corporal lay smudged lamp tins along what the field calls a runway so the next arrival can tell grass from grass. The ritual after an unscheduled arrival becomes a little parish. You check the airplane's modest ankles, undercarriage straight, mud not too adhesive, brake drums still believing in circles. You look at the prop as if asking a confidant. No nettles, I hope? You wipe the leading edges with a rag that lived a former life as a shirt, not because glamour matters but because wet grass on fabric is a slow sabotage. Light joke 2, you christen the rag the squadron livery department. The corporal promotes it to Chief of Shine. The weather may offer a parting that isn't a solution so much as a truce. Fog lifts to honest low cloud. The windsock recalls its alphabet. A distant hedge becomes a sentence instead of a rumor. You stand with the corporal and agree on a plan. Depart on the longest bit of ground. Climb straight ahead to the height where the next hedge cannot complain. And turn only when the map and your neck both approve. You brief the gate position like a runway marking because it is one. You brief the cow as a spectator with rights. You promise to come back with biscuits if you leave muddy tracks. If the field says, stay, you stay. Field craft is conservation as much as escape. Don't churn the soil. Don't wake the village's rumor factory. Don't tell a story bigger than the landing will bear. You read the local strips book, a pamphlet of pencil notes. Ditch along north hedge, soft after rain and corner by oak. Mind the goose that thinks it's a windsock. You add pilot polite, next to today's date in a tiny hand because gratitude wants a ledger too. Some days fog is a traveling show you follow until it forgets its lines. You hop to another relief strip 20 miles along the isobars, skirt a valley that learned mist at university, and find yourself welcomed by a signboard that simply reads, Land here if you must. You must. The tea is identical. The dog's assessment is transferable. The bell here is a saucepan and a wooden spoon. You learn the secret geography of Britain, where rugs appear on wings like blankets, where a tin of condensed milk lives under the radio bench, where the best pencil sharpener in 5 counties hides in a drawer labeled string. On departure, you practice the ethics of leaving. You walk the intended takeoff run in your boots, checking for molehills with the toe and for ruts with the heel. You memorize a line that misses the boggy patch by the alder. You mark the wind not by the socks sulking, but by the smudge on the pond and the way the smoke thread leans from the farmhouse chimney. You brief your own voice aloud. Airspeed here, tail up there, lift off by that wagon track. And the corporal nods because he was going to say that, and now he doesn't have to. Light joke 3. You declare the chicken at the far end of the meadow your personal air marshal. The farmer says she takes bribes and crumbs only. Up and away at last. You climb as if taking leave of a chapel. You don't bank steep enough to scuff the grass with your shadow. You pick up your heading and the clock like a sentence you set down and now continue. The fog sulks behind you. The map resumes its cheerful job. The relief strip shrinks to a bead on a thread and then to the certainty that if you needed to, you could do all that again without inventing anything. Back at the pool, you log. Diverted to X, fog, T excellent. Resumed when honest. The dispatcher underlines the airfield name once, the way a teacher underlines. Correct. You add a doodled bell next to the goat, and chalk company umbrella on the chalkboard and write, Thanks to every quiet field. Someone else adds a small bicycle and the word, Amen. You are tired in the way that tastes like manners salted with patience and boiled sweets. When you sleep, the fog becomes a soft blanket that you fold properly before setting on a chair, not to be sat on again until you're invited. You've learned a country of escape hatches and polite plans, of hedges that aren't obstacles but paragraphs, of corporals who own bells and know when to ring them. Diversion stops being a confession and becomes a craft. And in the morning, when the hedgerows remember their green, your map will still carry little stars that mean, "Blessed be the field, and all who land in it." The billet door opens and in walks a map with a passport. He has an accent you can't quite place until he smiles and says, "Maine," and the room decides he's American even before his boots finish their sentence. Behind him comes another voice with Alberta in it, then one from Joburg, one from Warsaw by way of Blackpool, and a soft drawl that makes dispatch stretch like taffy. Your pool has always sounded like weather. Today it sounds like a geography lesson that learned to fly. They're here because the board keeps writing more serials than one island can deliver, and because the ATA has a talent for turning willing hands into useful wings no matter what passport sits in a pocket. Mainstream fact: by mid-war, the Air Transport Auxiliary drew pilots from across the Commonwealth and beyond: Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, Poland, Czechoslovakia, the United States and more, and, uniquely for the time, accepted skilled aviators who were medically barred from combat service, including those who were one-eyed, one-armed, or otherwise disabled by peacetime standards. The recruitment poster did not say "perfect," it said "competent," and the difference filled hangars. You watch a man with a leather sleeve buckle his harness with one hand so efficiently the buckle blushes, then taxi a tiger moth as if balance were invented for him personally. You watch a pilot with a glass eye laugh at the idea of depth perception as a prerequisite for kindness, then grease a hurricane three-pointer that would make saints take notes. The Americans arrive in batches, some via arrangements as tidy as a timetable and others through channels that look, on a map, like a rumor with tickets. A woman with a crisp New England R turns her ferry pilot's notes into the kind of liturgy a choir could sing. A farm boy who grew up dusting crops treats the Oxford's asymmetric drills like the world's politest tractor lesson. They bring a certain cheer about hardware. Manifold inches, ma'am, not boost, you remind yourself, and a willingness to call tea, coffee, and drink it anyway. Light joke 1. You discover the surest way to harmonize imperial and U.S. units is to point at the throttle and say, "That one smoothly," which is a language both systems speak. Inclusivity here is not a speech. It's the way the flight line doesn't pause. The one-armed pilot slips his thumb through the yoke socket he and an ingenious fitter devised, not for fighters, but a revelation in trainers, then signs the chit with handwriting that puts yours to shame. A woman with monocular vision angles her head in the circuit just so and nails the flare as if she had been born with two horizons. The dispatch clerk never writes an asterisk by their names. The ferry pool already knows that qualification lives in practice, not adjectives. Quirky tidbit. The billet mirror keeps a tiny razor nick score where monocular shavers have learned not to trust reflections first thing. Next to it, someone has taped a note. "If you can land a spit, you can shave a chin," which is either solidarity or barber propaganda. They swap folklore like spanners. Canadians teach you how to read wind on snow by the way drifts scallop along hedges. South Africans swear by a sun sense that makes your watch jealous. A New Englander shows you how to tie a map so it won't mutiny in gusts. 2 twists. 1 tuck. A fisherman's knot for paper. The Poles, who have strong opinions about both radios and fate, drill, darky, procedures into anyone with ears and then bake you a cake so dense it qualifies as ballast. Your goat and chalk company umbrella doodle gains a tiny maple leaf, a springbok, and a star-spangled corner on the chalkboard, not as flags but as weather marks. Expect helpful accents. Instructors adapt their grammar to new ears. Boost sometimes becomes inches. Qfy gets stapled to barometric setting for field. And pneumatic brakes on the spit turns into squeeze the bicycle pump on the stick and let your feet do the steering. The notes remain bossy in one color. Your margins, however, fatten with translation. Harvard, don't call it 86 unless you brought a spare nameplate. Oxford, mixture levers wear British accents. Hurricane, radiator shutter is not a suggestion. Light joke too, you add. Biscuit equals cookie, still round, still comforting. To the conversion table and pretend it's performance critical. Not every difference is a map or a hand. Some are eyes. The monocular crowd teach a shy art. Let the runway grow wider at the same rate on both sides. Trust the ASI but land by attitude. Choose 3-point today when your depth sense feels like a rumor. Will it on when the crosswind teaches a new consonant. The one-eared flyer, yes, really, shows you how to let fingers listen, vibration through throttle, shiver through rudder bar, until the aircraft tells you more than any headset could. The colorblind pilot smiles at signal flares and says, I can't name the color, but I can read the pattern. That's the point. Then proves it with an approach that reads like Braille at 75 knots. The pool's minimum remains competence, which turns out to be a larger tent than anyone imagined. Historians still argue whether the ATA's broad medical tolerance was enlightened policy ahead of its time or a pragmatic wartime workaround that happened to discover a better truth. Whether those leather sleeves and glass eyes were exceptions that proved a rule or early evidence that many rules had been laziness in uniform. You set the debate aside whenever a one-legged instructor walks the pre-flight with a student and finds 3 things the rest of you missed. Because outcomes are louder than theories in a hangar. Americans bring one more export. A habit of writing home in lively paragraphs. Letters piloted by the 6888 on the other side of your other story now crisscross your current bench with airgraphs from Boston and Syracuse. Seeds of cultural exchange sprouting on tea tables. One woman receives a V-mail from her mother asking whether those British Spits have heaters. To which she replies, they have character. I bring the sweater. A Maine pilot scrawls on your slate. Wind 270 at 20 in inches, realizes his treason, and amends it to knots, dooming himself to a week of jokes and extra biscuits. He survives. You take a hurricane to a squadron where a ground crewman shakes hands like he's greeting an old dog who ran home, and the American at your side watches the ritual with the right kind of envy. He hands over an Oxford later with the same paper ballet and glows because the system worked exactly as designed. Serial to board, board to hands, hands to sky. Feels like delivering the post, he says. You think of your other pouch life and nod. The address here is a dispersal bay and the stamp is a signature that smells of oil. Accident boards do not care about passports. They ask the same questions in the same handwriting, and equal opportunity includes the duty to learn equally from bruises. A Canadian writes in a report that monocular approaches benefit from planning, not optimism. which is the finest sentence in the file. An American notes that he failed to translate inches to manners on a throttle and promises to apologize to every gasket henceforward. The board, being a board, prints the minutes in the font of stern antis. The billet posts the lessons above the kettle and boils water on them until they taste like habit. Your own kit diversifies under the influence. A South African shows you a trick for reading low sun glare with a cap brim and a pencil held as a fake horizon. A Canadian introduces you to a waxed paper sandwich wrap that resists drizzle better than your morale. An American gifts you a tiny torch with a red filter that makes your kneeboard look like a respectable map and not a found poem. Sir Editington, the blue pencil with opinions, learns to spell color/color, both ways and glories in its diplomatic service. Quirky tidbit, one-armed ferry pilot, tired of awkward glove removals, has a rigger sew a tiny loop on his left cuff to pull with his teeth when buckling. The rigger signs the modification. Approved by common sense. Another with a glass eye keeps a spare in a cotton spool tin labeled special screws, which may be the purest expression of aviation humor you will ever meet. You file both under evidence that ingenuity drinks tea here. Light joke 3 arrives when the dispatcher points at the chalkboard and declares, "Henceforth we banned a phrase I can't until at least 2 tries." The one-armed flyer raises an eyebrow and says, "Make it 3. Some levers are shy." The room laughs the good kind of laugh. The one that refuses to be cruel because the job doesn't have time for that. And the board resumes its arithmetic with everyone's names in the same tidy column. At days end you log a spit delivered, an Oxford ferried, 3 cups of tea converted into inches of manifold talk, and 1 new superstition acquired. Tap the harness buckle twice. Once for you. Once for whoever taught you the trick. You add a doodle to the goat and chalk umbrella, a little leather sleeve hugging the handle, a tiny glass eye glint done in shell gold chalk if such a thing exists, and beneath it, the note you will never say aloud in a briefing. Ability is a verb. When sleep arrives it reads like a roster. Maine, Manitoba, KwaZulu-Natal, Krakow, Kent. Place names put their elbows on the same table and learn to pass the jam without hoarding it. Your map, which has been accused of being flat, learns a new dimension, accent, and folds along a crease that feels a lot like a hand extended then gripped firmly in return. Whatever the historians decide later about motives, you know this. Tomorrow will be another page the accident board doesn't have to write, because today a dozen kinds of pilots were allowed to be precisely what the job required. Careful, competent, and on time. Pay turns out to be a ledger that measures both hours and hush. On Thursdays the pay clerk arrives with a metal box and the expression of a woman who can add in her sleep. You queue with everyone else, your name traveling from mouth to ear to envelope, while the room pretends not to count. There is dignity in these little wages. Flying pay for days that kept you aloft, allowances for billets that believed in mattresses and sometimes in pillows, a ration of satisfaction heavier than the coins. You sign the chit, pocket the envelope, and wonder briefly what the exchange rate is between on time and alive. Equal pay sits in the packet like a quiet law of physics now. Nobody points. Everybody spends. Light joke 1. You ask if the Goat and Chalk Company accepts shillings. Dispatch says it only takes gratitude and occasionally biscuits. The other ledger is sterner and uses ink that dries more slowly. Hazards are not rumors. They're minutes pinned to notice boards. The soporific gray mornings when engines clear their throats and don't finish the sentence. the invisible fences of barrage balloon cables, drawn in the margin of your map with a skull you don't show to the Met Corporal. The crosswind that plays an unexpected chord and discovers you are only mostly a musician. The sudden bird, all wing and indignation, that argues with your leading edge. You learn to look out not for drama but for the small, procedural treasons that accumulate into stories people tell quietly later with hands that forget to be still. When a mishap happens, and the word, if, clocks off early in wartime, the ritual begins with calm that feels unfeeling, then proves itself kind. Fire carts that have rehearsed every corner. Medics who've already got names for the cuts you didn't know you owned. A station commander who says little, which is the sound policy makes when it's busy. Then the board, a table, a pot of tea that behaves like an apology, 3 people with pencils and questions, a sheaf of forms numbered in ways that make you believe in bureaucracy as an art. Mainstream fact, British accident inquiries, RAF Form 765C and the Ministry's Civil Form 1180, fed the process. The ATA had its own reporting and safety circulars, collating causes, pilot error, mechanical, weather, and publishing, lessons learned, to all pools. You read those circulars the way sailors read tide tables, not for scandal, but for survival. Paper saves people by being boring. The form asks what you did with the mixture before the cough, where the wind came from in the last half mile, what the airplane said when you asked it to flare. You answer without theater. Your hands reenact the wrong lever you touched, and the board watches as if your fingers could be subpoenaed. The phrase, pilot's error, is not an insult here. It's a unit of measure that lets everyone calculate better habits. The circular that arrives a week later has your mistake turned into grammar. Confirm fuel selector before run-up, without your name, which is a mercy that still educates. Quirky tidbit. The board's pens are chained to the blotter with twine, not to prevent theft but to stop them rolling off when a witness waves his hands. Somewhere in the margins an old hand has doodled a tiny parachute on the twine knot, and no one cuts it off because the knot has seniority. Another superstition lives in the tea. Spoons must lie at right angles to saucers during testimony. A clerk once swore that crossed spoons foretold crossed sentences. You don't test the theory. You drink steadily and put the spoon down like a person who respects geometry. Peril isn't only luck, it's arithmetic that forgot its decimals. Fatigue, which arrives dressed as competence, and only later reveals it borrowed your reflexes without asking. The just this once turn inside the circuit because you think you're cleverer than wind. The slip that becomes a skid because the runway looked short through weather-stunned eyes. The taxiway that rearranged itself overnight while you were learning a new cockpit's location of brake. You write reminders on your kneeboard in a tone that borders on nagging. Speed is a gentleman. Treat it as so. Gear truth gusts. Don't land too please a watch. Light joke too, you add. Do not impress geese. After a near migration, the geese decline to be impressed anyway. Money becomes more than coins when peril collects names. There's the funeral fund, discreet envelopes passed in rooms that pretend to have errands elsewhere. There's the quiet policy about next of kin letters, patterned words written with unpatterned care by a commanding officer who would rather sign chits. There's danger money of a sort. Not a bronze star pinned to the day, but the shilling per ferry calculus multiplied by weather that felt heavy and briefings that spoke in shorter sentences. You spend none of that at the canteen. You exchange it for caution when the weak wants to sprint. The maintenance bay is an accident board that speaks spanner. A fitter points to a line of rivets that kept a wing honest during a flirtation with a hurried flare and calls it good news from the factory. The instrument's man places a crooked needle under your nose and tells you why your faith in it should be limited to certain altitudes. You listen because the Spanner dialect is where the inquiry's minutes are translated into metal, and because stories belong to hands as much as to paper. Historians still argue whether British wartime accident causation tilted more toward pilot error filtered through hurry, or toward mechanical failure filtered through rationing and wear. Whether the ATA's hurry hurt more than it helped by normalizing solo hops without radios, or whether standardization reduced chaos. You follow the debate and fly your contribution to the answer as tidiness. There is a bureaucracy of safety that you learn to love. Daily inspection cards you initial as if they were the last page of a good book. The Form 700 that follows the airplane like a shadow and refuses to leave until every signature has a date that matches physics. The dispatch flimsy that lists diversion fields in a font you could read at night under a blanket. The safety circulars that begin to sound like your own conscience after you've read enough of them. Paper is not romance. Paper is why romance has time to happen later. Risk is also social. The pressonitis that breeds at mess tables when a pilot boasts about beating weather as if weather were a rival rather than a climate. You counter it with a different fashion, telling dull stories about turning back, making tea into a victory lap, asking the Met Corporal to autograph a forecast as if she were a star. You normalize the sentence, no go, until it sounds like wisdom. It helps that the pay packet does not shrink when you divert. The ATA pays for arrival, not bravado. Light joke 3. You propose a ribbon bar 4. Most boring decision under pressure. Dispatch says the ribbon would be invisible and therefore correct. Accident boards collect oddities that live forever in the depot of you couldn't invent it. A tiger moth startled into the air by its own shadow when a cloud moved. A pigeon that adopted an Oxford's nacelle and rode along to the next field with the serene entitlement of ancient Rome. A bicycle left against a flare path drum that became briefly famous as an obstruction. The circulars mention none of these. They note the angles and the speeds and say, kindly, don't. You tell the stories anyway, gently, because laughter salts memory so the lesson keeps. The pay office does a different math. Shillings for hours, but also the moral accounting of, we need you again tomorrow. Some weeks you earn more ink than coin, a signature under. Delivered, a second line under. Returned, a stamp under. Night qualified, and only later remember to buy soap. You tuck a pound note into the back of your logbook and forget it exists. Months pass before you find it, and spend it on a fountain pen that writes like you meant to live this long. Quirky tidbit. Carbon paper smudges on your cuff act like rank. Dark blue means you argued with the typewriter about a Form 700. Pale ghosting means you copied the weather map and now look like you hugged a cloud. In the billet, a laundry line of shirts reads like a safety report. Who briefed what? Who debriefed whom? Who tucked their sleeves up before truly offensive tea? You compare stains and, by common law, grant the order of the indelible thumbprint to the person who inked themselves with a stamp pad while enthusiastic about a signature. You never quite get used to the envelope with another name not in the queue. People go, and the board keeps writing serials because that is how the conveyor belt honors them. You keep your rituals alive, tap the buckle twice, say, undercarriage true, aloud, stop at the windsock and tell it a joke. Because rituals are small bridges over larger holes. You read the safety circular as if sitting beside its author. You deliver your aircraft, sign your chit, and understand that the boldest sentence you write each day is the one in your log that ends with a time and nothing else dramatic. At lights out, you count hazards the way some count sheep, balloon, cable, wind, bird, brake, fatigue, and you place a small paperweight of procedure on each one. The room breathes like a hangar after everyone's gone home, warm in the middle, cool at the edges, tools sleeping where they're supposed to. You promise yourself to be worth your pay tomorrow not by being brave, but by being predictably careful in a world that misuses adjectives. Somewhere, an accident board pen dries. Somewhere else, a pay envelope softens because someone opened it with clean hands. You turn on your side and let paper be the pillow it always wanted to be. You feel the end arrive the way a busy clock winds down, tick, tick, space, until the office holds a silence big enough to hear your own pencil think. Orders begin speaking in the past tense. The chalkboard's threads are erased into pale ghosts. The Goat and Chalk Company umbrella, faithful mascot of weather and wit, acquires a little luggage tag that reads home. The last weeks are a choreography of finishing, paperwork closed, spares counted, maps folded along the creases your thumbs taught them, and a procession of aircraft delivered not to squadrons this time but to storage, disposal, or schoolhouses that plan to turn engines into lectures. The parade at White Waltham is tidy and a little bewildered, flights formed on a grass that has memorized tires. A last roll call that pronounces names the way a ledger does when it knows it's nearly out of columns. Mainstream fact: the Air Transport Auxiliary stood down in late 1945, winding up its operations after VJ Day. White Waltham marked the service's end with formal farewells, and the organization closed its books that autumn. You sign your last paycheck with a hand that remembers when equal pay arrived and then stopped being a headline because it started being a habit. Someone pins a paper star to the briefing board and writes, "Thank you," where "weather" used to be. After the war, the conveyor belt breaks into proper nouns. A handful of pilots step directly into civil cockpits. BA, founded in 1946, and BOAC, already flying ocean weather, will take some of your colleagues, especially the men, into schedules that sound like lullabies to you now: London, Paris, Cairo, Karachi. Others become instructors, engineers, bush pilots, test pilots, air racers when petrol and permission coincide. Many women discover that peacetime prefers its paradoxes neat. You were good enough to deliver a Spitfire yesterday. Today there is no vacancy into which you can fit the word captain. Historians still argue whether the ATA's precedent, women ferrying fighters, equal pay in 1943, was a bridge to peacetime equality or a brilliant wartime exception the country quickly forgot to normalize. You filed the debate under work in progress. Your logbook, which never learned sarcasm, records competence as if that were the point, which it was. Some careers fly onward in straighter lines. A monocular pilot becomes the world's best examiner of approaches by feel. A one-armed veteran runs a maintenance shop where checklists are placed as reverently as tea. The boy from Maine returns across the ocean, finds the sky less rationed, and starts an air taxi on lakes that look like mirrors the size of counties. Pauline Gower's papers say more with fewer words than any speech. She did the building, the equal pay arguing, the weathering. The country goes on with the habit she sketched. She will die in 1947, and you will not be ready for that page to turn. You will keep her memos folded in your head anyway, where they continue to authorize common sense. Light joke 1. The Goat and Chalk Company, in theory, diversifies into civilian life with a line of umbrellas labeled and no longer classified. But customer demand remains suspiciously high among dispatch clerks. The maps retire first. You fold the 500,000 sheet along creases that have become small valleys. Pencil lines a translucent archaeology of errands. Quirky tidbit. More than one pilot's silk escape map becomes a peacetime necktie or the lining of a jacket. Bright rivers and railroad veins stitched into everyday collars. The world literally close to the chest. Your Dalton computer, edges polished by thumbs that negotiated wins, becomes a coaster on a kitchen table where tea performs its old duties with less urgency and more gratitude. Navigation instrument. You tell visitors. Bread and butter calculator. You tell yourself. Airfields grow half wild at the edges, hedges press their elbows back into perimeter tracks, and dispersals become curiously elegant parking for tractors. The clubhouse still smells of dope and paraffin long after it should have surrendered to polish. The flasks remember how to be steam. The safety circulars are boxed and stacked in an archive that will one day be visited by a student who will take notes on notes, amazed that so much of survival was written in pencil and swept daily into routine. The accident board's twine-tethered pens are untied at last. Someone keeps one as a talisman and finds it writes grocery lists with an honesty that makes tomatoes arrive on time. You keep your rituals because rituals keep you. You still touch the buckle twice. Once for you, once for whoever taught you to. You still say, undercarriage true, under your breath when a bicycle coasted toward a curb, which is ridiculous. And yet you and the bicycle will be found without dents later, so perhaps not. You still choose boredom on purpose and call it good planning. Light joke 2, you label the pantry shelves. Fuel on, and mixture lean, to encourage sensible shopping. The grocer refuses to adjust his price per gallon. Every now and then someone asks what it felt like, and you have to decide which meter to use. In feet above sea level it was 2,000 most days, and never enough when the channel had opinions. In inches of manifold, it was enough to be kind. In minutes, it was a long queue of short flights that added up to a timetable nobody photographed because it was the opposite of flamboyant. You try. It felt like errands that mattered, and find the sentence damp with truth. The person nods, perhaps disappointed you have not produced firelight, but they smile anyway. Because errands are the nation's secret engine. Machines you delivered become museum pieces, postcards scrap, plowshares, legends. The snag lists turn into marginalia for docents who will one day point at your penciled booze gauge flippant, as evidence that people once wrote frank jokes on official paper. You move house and decide which memorabilia passed the suitcase test. The wings badge, pinned to a sweater that doesn't care for applause, the ferry pilot's notes, still bossy, still right, a photograph you took of someone climbing down from a hurricane without realizing she was making history by not trying to. Historians still argue whether those paper maps were the real co-pilots and radios were the guests, whether dead reckoning matured you or only taught you excellent manners. You answer with a matte crease and a stopwatch that still works. Call it both. The pay ledger concludes in arithmetic you can understand. You were paid for outcomes, not adjectives. The other ledger remains open in your head. Times you turned back and told a good story about tea instead. Times you diverted to a field with a bicycle and a bell. Times you handed the machine to ground crew whose gratitude ran on grease and relief. You hear their voices sometimes when rain sandpapers the window. Sign here, please. Serial confirmed. What did she feel like? You answer softly. Straight, cool, honest. Light joke 3. You consider sending Christmas cards to 3 winds, head, tail, cross, and thanking them for service rendered and lessons taught. You imagine the crosswinds card arriving late and unreadable. The last entry in the log is unremarkable. A cereal, an airfield, a timeout, a time-in, a remark box that says, delivered. You close the book and it feels like the runway when the wheels have stopped rolling, still, warm, crowded with invisible momentum. You put the map on top and the Dalton on top of that. A small tower of tools that made Miles perform on command. Somewhere out in the world, a young pilot you will never meet reads a typed note that echoes your old margins. Somewhere a kettle boils at an airfield that reverted to grass and then to sheep. Somewhere a museum label tells half of what your hands knew entirely. And you, who once thought of the sky as a noun, keep thinking of it as a verb. You navigate grocery lists with bearing and drift. You ferry conversations from awkward beginnings to safe hangars. You dead reckon home in the dark by the silhouette of an elm you trust. The world, disarmed and still full of weather, accepts you back into errands that don't need approvals. The Goat and Chalk Company umbrella, retired to a hallway hook, wears a tiny knot of ribbon someone made from a strip of silk mat. On days when rain auditions for old roles, you carry it and feel the steadying tug of 1,000 small flights that made a war logistically survivable and a peace administratively possible. That's a lot to ask of errands. They did it anyway. Let the airfield go quiet now, like a book whose last page knows how to close itself. The grass becomes ordinary grass again, the runway a slightly straighter idea in a meadow that prefers clover. The map rests under your palm, cool and docile, its rivers and roads asleep, its fold a soft ridge your thumb rubs without thinking. The Dalton's wheel doesn't ask for wind anymore. It just casts a round, gentle shadow on the table, like a sundial that approves of evenings. You breathe slower, as if the room had agreed to a better tempo. Inhale, count the steady rhythm of a cart far off on a lane. Exhale, let the pencil roll away from your fingers and not be fetched. The sounds you keep, tea kettle, distant footsteps, a page turned somewhere you can't see, are small and civil. Engines belong to a different day. So do weather fronts. Tonight, clouds can be only clouds, and you can be only someone who once asked them for courtesy and was sometimes surprised by generosity. If a memory floats in, let it be a helpful one. A bicycle lamp nodding yes at a relief strip you reached politely. A ground crew's grin when a serial number arrived exactly where it was expected. The light touch of a harness buckle clicked twice, and then forgotten. None of these require attention now. They tidy themselves and fade like good guests who know when to leave. The kettle throws a little sigh and settles. The window collects the last of the pale sky and keeps it until morning. Your hands feel lighter without checklists. They are just hands again, warm, folded, allowed to be still. If you need a star to steer by, make it something small, a glimmer on a teacup rim, the faint shine of shell gold thread in the ribbon on the umbrella, the almost sound of pages putting themselves in order. Let the map close. Let the room keep watch. Your routes will be here when you wake, or they will be someone else's to enjoy, and either way is all right. You have delivered what needed delivering. You are home, or very near. Rest.